Medea lowered her eyelashes, her fingertips gently touching the back of Jason's hand. That gentle greeting still echoes in her mind. Jason bowed his head to kiss the back of her hand, his gaze locked on Medea's face. This is the man I have loved all my life. Rainwater seeped through the cracks of the stone bricks, forming puddles in the dark dungeon. To have him, I was willing to give everything. Jason walked over with heavy steps, his boot heels striking the stone slabs, echoing hollowly. And I did just that. Jason stopped in front of the cell door, shadows covering half of his face. The iron door made a harsh scraping sound. Jason stood at the cell door with two guards closely behind him. Medea sat on the damp ground, her hands bound by iron chains. Jason. A guard took a step forward, pointing at the iron bars, and shouted sternly, "How dare you call his majesty by his name?" Jason looked down expressionlessly. Medea slightly turned her face. "I did everything for you, yet you abandoned me and chose that saint. Not to be the empress." Medea stared into the void. "For you, I stole the country's treasure. I slayed the mad dragon. I even sacrificed the soldiers of my homeland." Medea held up the crown high, offering it to Jason with both hands. "I personally offered the throne to you, but what I got in return, that was utter betrayal." Jason lowered his gaze, avoiding Medea's eyes. "I told you, all of this is the will of the oracle. Didn't I already make your son, Lien, the crown prince?" Lien died just 6 months after he entered the palace alone. Medea knelt by the coffin, stroking the small corpse lying among white flowers. At that moment, I finally understood that the next one's in line. That were me and Leah. Medea's eyes widened, golden patterns reflecting in her pupils. Jason stood outside the iron bars and let out a soft sigh. "A new oracle has descended. You and your daughter will bring ruin to this country." Jason closed his eyes and softly called Medea's name. "For the sake of our past affection, I didn't execute you according to the oracle, but granted you a peaceful death." Jason looked down at the woman on the ground. "But you are still full of resentment." The corners of Medea's mouth slightly curled up, revealing a cold sneer. "You still think you did nothing wrong?" "Me." Da raised her head, looking straight into Jason's eyes. "End this quickly. I don't want to see your face for another second." Jason was silent for a moment, his gaze sweeping over Medea's profile. "About the children, I am sorry." Medea lowered her head in silence. Jason turned away. "Anyway, you will see them soon. That way, you won't feel lonely." "How fortunate." Medea suddenly froze. "The children? Could it be that Leah too?" "This is impossible, no. Leah should have already." Medea's face turned deathly pale, her pupils trembling in the shadows. Heavy footsteps approached from afar. A red skirt that swept past time. Werner stopped in front of the cell door, softly apologizing to Medea. Medea suddenly raised her head, staring intently at the woman before her. "Werner, why are you here? You should be taking Leah across the border right now." Medea screamed. Ed in exhaustion. Leah huddled in Werner's arms, her hands tightly gripping the cloak, tears wetting her young face. Werner avoided her gaze, her tone as calm as, "Water. I ultimately could not betray his majesty." Medea raised her face, her eyes full of empty. "Ness. What?" Werner covered her face and leaned against Jason's side. "How could I possibly do such a thing? Betrayal is wrong. Sister, you should be able to understand, right?" Jason looked down at the dungeon. "The children must think the same way. They will understand me." Medea threw her head back and screamed, a tearing wail bursting from her throat. "Jason, you heartless monster!" Medea suddenly lunged at the iron bars. The chains violently shook in the air, the sound of clashing metal echoing through the dungeon. Her bare feet dragged on the stone slabs, leaving mottled bloodstains. Werner lowered her eyelids, her fingertips lightly touching her lips. "Oh, my poor sister. What should I do with you?" Medea collapsed in the muddy water, her fingers tightly digging into the ground. "Not even beasts would." Medea roared as she crashed into the iron bars. "Not even beasts would harm their own offspring." The guard suddenly drew his sword, pointing it at Medea, and shouted fiercely, "Shut up! How dare you be so insolent to his majesty?" Jason raised his hand to stop him, his tone as calm as water. "It's fine. I have enough tolerance to ignore this." Jason turned his face, looking at the cage for the last time. "Farewell, Medea. I will remember your contributions." Jason stepped away, his boot heels striking the stone slabs. It's getting cold, Werner. Don't stay here too long. Werner crossed her hands over her chest and bowed slightly. His Majesty's mercy is touching. Werner stopped her steps, turning her head to look at Medea in the shadows, the corners of her mouth curling into a smile. Werner walked out of the dungeon, the two guards closely following behind her. Sunlight fell on her hair. Medea knelt paralyzed on the ground, her hands bound by heavy iron shackles. Her fingertips touched the cold stone bricks. A broken pendant that rolled onto the ground. Valdina looked down at the ground. At this moment, Medea, with trembling hands, picked up that red silk pouch. Leah's shrill cries exploded in her ears. "No, I don't want to go, Mother. Please don't send me away, Mom." Medea looked down at the pouch. Leah's final calls that pierced through her spine. "Mom." Medea knelt in the pool of blood, her hands tightly clutching the relic. The chains rubbed violently as she trembled. Her purple pupils were completely swollen, load by the shadows. Werner covered her mouth and laughed. "Look at you now. The once high and mighty princess of Aldina has completely crumbled. Your brother was also torn to pieces by magical beasts." Medea's pupils suddenly contracted, her reflection shattering into pieces in the broken lens. Blood splattered onto her silver hair. Werner burst into maniacal laughter. "All of this? That is your fault, you fool." Medea, with her back to the cell door, lowered her head and stared into the dark. Ness, this is hell. The bottomless hell I created with my own hands." Gold coins poured out from the treasure chest, drowning the blood-stained crown. Medea slowly turned her head. "Werner, why do you look so happy?" Valna gently stroked her chest. "No, I shouldn't blame you. Thanks to you, we were able to reach this point." Heavy rain washed against the iron bars. "If it weren't for you, Valdina's loyalists, and your brother wouldn't have been so easy to deal with." Werner stood in the shadows, looking down at the paralyzed Medea on the ground. Medea softly repeated that word. "We?" "So Jason and your family had joined forces from the very beginning." Medea stared at Werner. "It was you who persuaded me to hand over the Sage's Stone to Jason. Could it be that since then it had already begun?" Werner's fingertips lightly touched her chin, the corners of her mouth curling up. "Poor Medea, you still haven't realized it even now. From the very beginning, your life has been in the hands of my family." Werner declared softly, her index finger pulling a wooden frame. Silk threads wrapped around Medea's limbs, like manipulating a broken puppet. "Thanks to you, my father will become the king of Valdina, and I will become the empress of this empire." Werner looked down at the prisoner. "You are just our chess piece. Do you understand?" Of course, Jason knew too. He has been on our side all along. Werner stared into Medea's eyes. Medea lowered her head in silence, her long hair covering her face, shadows spreading beneath her feet. "Don't be too sad. You will see your dear family soon. You should feel happy instead." Werner turned, to leave. Medea knelt on the cold stone bricks, her teeth biting hard into her lips. Blood seeped from the corners of her mouth, emitting a faint cracking. That sound. Medea raised her head, her purple pupils locked dead onto Werner. "I will never forget. I will never forget you, your family, and every single Claudio." Werner stopped her steps, and suddenly, turn around. "What did you say?" Werner pointed at the prisoner on the ground and sternly ordered the two guards. "What are you doing?" "Quickly pour the poison down her throat." The guards suddenly stepped forward. One pinned Medea's shoulders, while the other tightly gripped her jaw. "Hold her down. Don't let her move." Medea was forced to tilt her neck back. The cold mouth of the bottle struck her teeth, and purple liquid poured into her throat. "Jason, Werner, and every Claudio. My foolishness, even death, cannot atone for it." Medea struggled violently, broken whimpers coming from her throat. "No matter how many reincarnations it takes, I will come back and destroy all of this with my own hands." Medea leaned over and vomited, blood splattering on the stone slabs. "My foolishness and the original sin of you monsters." Jason walked away, his back disappearing at the end of the corridor. Whether it is those who submit to fate or those favored by the gods. Werner looked down at the ruins beneath her feet. The guard stood on both sides of the iron bars. "No one can escape from my hands. Not until I use your blood to light the way forward." Medea's profile pressed against the cold ground, her purple pupils gradually losing focus, bloodshot lines crawling across the corners of her eyes. That will never stop." Werner leaned over, staring at the dying prey, the corners of her mouth curling into a smile. Shadows covered half of her face. Medea suddenly widened her eyes, flames igniting deep within her pupils. Fresh blood spilled from between her lips, dyeing her silver hair red. A drop of Blood fell, crashing into the dark red pool of blood, stirring up a circular ripple. Your Highness, Medea suddenly opened her eyes, her green pupils violently contracting. Her vision lost focus in the void. A maid stood behind her, asking softly, "What do you think of this new crown, Your Highness?" Medea stared at the mirror, her silver-white long hair falling on her back, a heavy metal pressing on her head. The mirror reflected the backs of two maids. The maid tilted her head slightly and called out again softly, "Your Highness." Medea sat in front of the dressing table, her hands pressing tightly against the tabletop. Cold sweat rolled down her cheeks, a purple shadow enveloping her brow. What happened? Medea raised her hands, staring at her fingertips. Her body felt light. The pain had disappeared. Previously, her body was like a withered rag. Even breathing was difficult. Medea stroked the back of her hand. The skin was smooth as before. The scars left from the expedition, though were all gone. This is definitely not hell. Medea looked around. The mirror reflected a youthful contour. Could it be that I returned to the past? Medea suddenly raised her head, her green pupils trembling. She stared intently at the maid in front of her. "Where's Peleus?" The maid stopped what she was doing, her expression hesitant. "What did you say?" Medea turned her head, staring into the maid's eyes. "I mean my brother. Is he still alive?" The maid crossed her hands over her chest, looking hesitant. "What are you talking about, Your Highness? You must still be suffering from the aftereffects of falling off your horse. His Majesty the King is, of course, still alive." Medea tilted her head up slightly, her green pupils losing focus as her fingertips touched the necklace on her neck. "Alive." Medea suddenly stood up, her hands leaning on the table. "I'm going to see my brother." The maid followed closely, looking panicked. "Where are you going?" "His Majesty is still on the battlefield." Medea repeated softly, "Battlefield. So the war of conquest. That hasn't ended yet." Medea turned her face, shadows covering her eye sockets. The maid cowered and stepped back. "Your Highness." The maid hurriedly chased toward the door. "Please call the royal doctor. Her Highness must have hit her head when she fell off the horse." Medea lifted her skirt and walked out the door without looking back. "No, I have to confirm it with my own eyes." The maids stopped in their tracks, looking at each other, not in dismay. "Your Highness." Medea walked through the corridor, her blonde hair rising and falling in the light and shadow. Her footsteps echoed on the empty stone bricks as she rushed down the stairs. Her skirt brushed past the cold handrails, her breathing becoming rapid. Medea sprinted through the dark corridor, her leather shoes striking the ground, making muffled sounds. She pushed open the heavy wooden door. Torches flickered on the walls, their light piercing the shadows ahead. Deep underground in the Valdina royal palace, at the very bottom of the spiral staircase, Medea stood in front of the forbidden door. Only those of royal blood could enter. Medea reached out and grasped the cold door handle, her fingertips exerting force to push open the heavy wooden door. Medea lowered her head and knelt on the ground, her hair covering her face, her voice trembling. "Your Majesty, it's all because of me. If I hadn't handed over the sage's stone." Peleus walked up to Medea and reached out to stroke her long hair. "I don't blame you. Just survive, that's enough." They raised her face, tears trembling at the edges of her eyes. And Peleus stood in the shadows, his silver-white, long hair flying over his shoulders, a smile on his lips. "You must be happy. My sister." Medea suddenly woke up with a start, panting heavily. Sweat had soaked through her back. "I must stay calm. My brother is still alive." Medea pushed open the heavy wooden door, light pouring in through the crack. Then, the sage's stone. "That must still be here too." Medea walked into the secret chamber. Her green pupils reflected a blue light, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. "It is still here." A blue crystal floated in midair, emitting a cold light. Medea stood under the beam of light, looking up and gazing at this. "That stone." Medea turned her face, tears spilling from her purple pupils as she softly murmured, "Sage's stone." Her knees gave way and she knelt on the ground, her skirt spreading out on the cold stone bricks, looking up at that beam of light that pierced through. "Not the darkness. I can save my brother now." Vanna pressed her chest, panting rapidly. "Sister Medea, Grand Duke Jason is in deep pain. If he can get the sage's stone, everything will be fine." Jason opened his palm, a smile on his lips. "Medea, the sage's stone is only a national treasure in name. You can borrow it for a while and then return it. Once the relationship between the two countries improves, Peleus will understand you." Medea raised her head, her eyes showing hesitation. Jason looked at her. You wouldn't want Jason and your child to grow up without their father's protection, would you? Jason leaned down, getting close to Medea's ear. I love you, Medea. We're saying all this for your own good. So, hand over the sage's stone. It was me who stole it. The sage's stone eventually shattered into powder. Medea reached out to touch the crystal, her fingertips brushing across its cold edges. The fragments were buried under the walls of the Kazan border. It was the beginning of all tragedies. Armor that was scattered in pools of blood, long swords broken. The relationship between the two countries did not improve, as my uncle had claimed. War swallowed everything. Peleus fell in the ruins, his face covered in bloodstains. His silver long hair was dyed dark red, his eyes gradually losing. Not focus. Medea tilted her head back, the corners of her mouth curling up, forcing out a broken laugh from her throat. Huh. Medea burst into loud laughter, her eye sockets turning red, her purple pupils trembling slightly. Her laughter echoed in the empty secret chamber. Ancestors of Valdina, gods who protect this land. Medea rested her hands on the edge of the altar, her fingertips touching the cold stone platform. She bowed down and knelt, her forehead close to the ground. Thank you for granting my final quest. Medea suddenly raised her head, her green pupils contracting in the dim light. I will never repeat the same mistakes again. Never. Medea stood alone in the empty corridor, her hands crossed in front of her. Now, there are many things that can be changed. The sage's stone is still in my hands. Time has returned to the moment the horse-riding accident occurred. Medea raised her hand to support her chin, her fingertips lightly touching her lips. 17 years old. This is the moment when everything starts anew. At the age of 17, during the tea party, the horse was startled and ran wild. Nuriel threw herself forward, using her body to protect. Not me as I fell. When I woke up from my coma, Nuriel had already left the palace without leaving a single word. Rumor had it that she was tired of serving a fallen royal family, saying this place was a dead-end dumping ground, so she flew far away. Medea stood at the end of the corridor, her hands crossed in front of her. Neri. Dottel is definitely not that kind of person. Medea looked out the window, her back elongated in the light and shadow. She wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. Whispers of maids came from afar. Did you hear? Jenna is making things difficult for the princess's maid. Medea suddenly turned her face, her green pupils. Dot suddenly contracting. Two maids holding bamboo baskets were talking in low voices. That weirdo who gave up her status as a knight to serve the princess has always been targeted by the maid chief. They plan to use the princess's horse-riding accident as an excuse to completely get rid of Nuriel. Even though she's a savior, the maid chief can twist the facts. Medea stopped in her tracks. Her skirt brushed against the stone steps, her leather shoes. Dot striking the ground, making a crisp sound. The two maids suddenly turn around, their faces instantly turning deathly pale. Medea stood at the intersection of light and shadow, her eyes ice dash. Dot cold. Where's she? Medea stared into their eyes, her voice devoid of temperature. The maid stammered. Medea clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white from the force. Her nails dug deeply into her palms. I see it all clearly now. Everything Nuriel suffered was entirely my uncle's conspiracy. Medea straightened her back, her blonde hair fluttering slightly in the wind. A falling whip that tore through the air, making a sharp crack. Jenna swung her arm. Do you really have to see blood before you give up? As long as you say you will leave, everything can end. Jenna gritted her teeth. No one cares about a stubborn fool like you. Not even your master. Medea stood outside the door, her blonde hair hanging down her back, listening to the curses coming from inside the room. What exactly do you want to get from this persistence? This will only be a meaningless and tragic death, don't you understand? Jenna let out a furious roar. You stubborn bitch. Jenna tightly gripped the long whip with both hands, her knuckles bulging, her chest heaving violently. You actually refused to say a single word. Nuriel knelt on the ground, her brown ponytail messy, her hands pressing tightly on her knees. She let the bloodstains spread on her torn clothes. Jenna raised the long whip high and suddenly swung it down. The tip of the whip split the flesh open, splashing. But a string of dark red. Look at our most loyal knight. Jenna let out a mocking laugh. It's because you followed the wrong master. Not that you have to suffer like this. The shadow of the whip fell again. Nuriel's body trembled violently, but she remained silent. Jenna raised her arm once more. Even if you die here, A hand suddenly reached out, tightly gripping Jenna's wrist, stopping the falling whip handle. Jenna abruptly turned her head, her pupils dilating in shock. Her lips trembled as she squeezed out a broken voice. "Your Highness." Medea stood behind Nuriel, her silver-white long hair hanging down, her purple pupils exuding a chilling intent. Her right hand locked Jenna's movement like iron pincers. Nuriel raised her head, blood sliding down the corner of her mouth, her green pupils trembling violently. "Your Highness, why are you here?" Medea snatched the long whip and backhanded it towards Jenna. The tip of the whip tore through the air with a crisp crack. Jenna let out a miserable scream, covering her cheek and stumbling backward, blood seeping through her fingers. "How dare you lay a hand on me?" Medea stepped forward, her blonde hair in the light and shadow. Rising and falling. "I should be the one asking that. Who allowed you to secretly detain my maid? Who allowed you to use private lynching?" Medea looked down at Jenna, who had collapsed on the ground. "I allowed it." Heavy footsteps sounded as Kajene pushed the door open and entered. Not a single strand of her black hair was out of place, her stern gaze sweeping over Medea. Kajene stopped in her tracks, her hands crossed in front of her stomach, her gaze coldly staring ahead. "Princess, what exactly is the meaning of this discourteous behavior?" Medea turned her head. She looked straight at Kajene without the slightest flinching. "Maid Chief." Jenna slowly crawled forward. "It seems you've been waiting for this moment." Maid Chief Kajene. Medea stopped beside Nuriel, looking at this woman who relied on selling her soul to exchange for power. Kajene, as her uncle's lapdog, covered the sky with one hand in the inner palace. Even without any qualifications, she still sat firmly in a high position. She pinned the stigma of promiscuity on Medea, attempting to isolate the royal bloodline, using any means necessary to plunge Medea into the abyss. Medea turned her head, her green pupils reflecting a cold light. "You have just recovered from a severe illness and shouldn't overexert yourself like this, Ka." Jean stood by the door, gesturing for the maids behind her to step forward. "Please go back. These children will escort your highness away." "What are you doing?" "Hurry up and escort her highness back." "Maid Chief." Medea crossed her arms over her chest. "I found out that my maid was subjected to torture without my knowledge, without a trial, indiscriminately using the whip. When did the royal family become so tyrannical?" Kajene lowered her eyelids, shadows covering half of her face. "Your Highness, hearing you say that really makes me sad." Kajene raised her hand and pressed her chest. "That girl named Nuriel not only neglected her duties, but also put you in danger. This level of punishment is already very lenient." Kajene looked down at the mess on the ground. "I am merely fulfilling a servant's duty, wholeheartedly serving your highness." Nuriel knelt in the pool of blood, her brown ponytail a complete mess, her green pupils staring fixedly at the ground, her fingertips digging deeply into her palms. Jean pressed her chest and let out a soft sigh. "Goodness, I must cultivate more patience. Her highness still needs a lot of teaching. Now, escort princess back." Kajene waved her hand, and the two maids immediately stepped forward. Medea turned sideways, watching the approaching maids. "Maid Chief, listening to you talk really makes me curious." Kajene stopped her move. Meant. "And what would that be?" Medea stared into her eyes. "Serving Valdina is serving His Majesty the King. In this royal family, there are many who possess the Valdina bloodline. There is Her Majesty the Grand Empress Dowager, and also Uncle Claudius." Medea's mouth curled up slightly. "Maid Chief, is your loyalty solely directed at His Majesty?" Kajene stiffened, her pupils contracting in shock. "Of course it is directed at His Majesty the King, right?" Medea pressed on step by step. "Maid Chief, why don't you answer this simple question?" Jean clenched her teeth, her facial muscles twisting in anger. "Damn it, the regent is naturally suspicious. He must have his spies here." The two maids huddled together, whispering in low voices, their eyes revealing unease. Medea suddenly slapped the table, the wood letting out a dull, loud bang. "If I admit here that my master is the king." Medea tilted her head slightly. "Is this such a difficult question to answer?" Kajene calmed her breathing. "I was merely caught off guard by being asked something so obvious. That's all. My master is His Majesty the King." Medea nodded. "The Maid Chief is right. In that case, why did you treat the maid His Majesty left for me like this?" Medea looked down at Nuriel. Did that child really harm me? Do you really think so? Nuriel knelt on the ground, her broken brown hair covering her bloodied face, her green pupils full of endurance. Medea closed in on Kajene. Swear to your only master, His Majesty the King. Can you swear to this? Kajene clenched her teeth, her facial muscles twitching violently. This little beast actually dares to press me step by step like this. Kajene stared at me, the corners of her mouth twitching with anger. I don't understand why your highness is suddenly being so insolent, but I must make you realize your position. Please forgive my presumption. Kajene crossed her arms, but I think this conversation is completely unnecessary. You are merely His Majesty the King's flesh and blood, and not my true master. Moreover, Kajene raised her chin. At the late king's funeral, Her Majesty the Grand Empress Dowager's cries still echo in my ears to this day. It's all because of you. The Grand Empress Dowager grabbed Medea's collar, screaming out of control in front of the Red Morning Hall. It's because of you that my son is dead. Medea froze in place, her blonde hair falling over her black mourning clothes, her green pupils trembling in fear. That curse-like accusation nailed her into the abyss of sin. The whole country was mourning, countless people weeping bitterly. Kajene covered her mouth and nose. I am the same. If it weren't for your highness, we wouldn't have had to endure this kind of pain. If it weren't for your highness, I should have continued to serve the late king. The inner palace wouldn't have had to use private lynching on a maid either. Kajene pressed closer step by step. Medea lowered her eyes, silently bearing the accusations. Who should be responsible for the late king's tragedy? The answer couldn't be clearer. Kajene's voice echoed in the corridor. Someone who only sits securely in her position thanks to the king's grace actually delusions about bossing people around here. Her Majesty the Grand Empress Dowager loathes that girl, and so does His Majesty the King. Kajene leaned close to Medea's ear. Otherwise, after he ascended the throne, though why did he never come back? Kajene suddenly turned around to look at the executioner holding the whip. What are you doing? Continue executing the teaching. The executioner raised the long whip. Yes, ma'am. Medea lowered her head and chuckled softly, her laughter echoing in the dim room. Her blonde hair covered her eyes, only revealing a turned-up corner of her lips. Nuriel struggled to raise her head and softly called out, Your Highness. Medea turned and walked to the torture rack, reaching out to grab a wooden stick. Maid, Chief. Medea turned her face, her green pupils showing chilling intent. Come over and lift your skirt. Kajene's eyes widened. What did you say? Medea gently stroked the long stick in her hand. I will respect you and no longer interfere with your discipline of Nuriel. But next, there will be an even more exciting scene. Medea stared at Kajene. You teach Nuriel over there, and I will teach you over here. Are you trying to use private lynching on me? Kajene shrank back, her facial muscles twisting in panic, her breathing becoming rapid and heavy. If palace personnel neglect their duties, the king has the right to bring down punishment upon them. Medea approached slowly, her voice deep and steady. During the king's absence, this right belongs to. Medea raised her right hand high, pinching a silver signet ring between her fingers. That this right belongs to the king's designated proxy. Medea straightened her back, her hands folded in front of her abdomen, her fingertips, gleaming with the light of the silver seal. Do you recognize it? This is the royal seal left to me by my royal brother. Medea displayed the ring. Kajene stumbled backward. What? I've never heard of such a thing. When a late king was on the battlefield, the regent used this clause to impose severe punishments on royal family members. Do I have to teach you this too? Goodness, Maid Chief, there are so many things you don't know. Medea gripped a long wooden stick, a cold smile hanging on the corners of her mouth. Lift your skirt. Medea issued the command, her voice echoing in the silent room. Your Highness, Kajene screamed, stepping back, her hands tightly clutching the pendant on her chest. Now, Medea suddenly took a step forward, her eyes as sharp as blades. What are you doing? Jenna, continue carrying out the whipping on Nuriel. Medea turned her head to look at the executioner, her tone steady. And chilling. You would never dare to actually strike me. Kajene stepped back, her black dress sweeping across the wooden floor. You know better than anyone what fate you will face if you defy me. Unless that you are truly mad. Kajene screamed, her hands desperately pressing down her skirt. Medea swung the wooden stick, her arm drawing a red afterimage in the air. The stick struck heavily against flesh, letting out a dull, explosive crack. Kajene erupted in a miserable shriek, her body losing balance, and collapsing wretchedly to the ground. Medea looked down at the woman on the floor. Stand up, maid chief. It's too early to fall down now. We've only just begun. Wait. Kajene raised her head, her pupils trembling violently. Medea raised the long stick high again, the shadow of the stick obscuring Kajene's vision. A shrill wail pierced the roof, echoing for a long time over the magnificent palace. In the afterglow of the setting sun, along the quiet corridor, Medea supported Nuriel, the two dragging their heavy. Footsteps forward. Your Highness, Nuriel spoke weakly. Why did you do that? Don't force yourself to stand. Medea tightened her arm. Lean on me. Nuriel lowered her head, softly spitting out her thanks. The maid chief controls the entire palace. She will definitely retaliate against you. Nuriel clenched her jaw. Even now, I should go back and beg for her mercy. I'm sorry. Medea murmured softly. Your Highness? Nuriel turned her face in confusion. Blood slid down her temple, dyeing her torn collar red. It's all my fault. Medea closed her eyes, tears silently sliding down her cheeks. Because of me, you suffered all this. In her previous life, Nuriel had never left this palace. To protect her, she died amidst endless beatings. Medea covered her face and wept bitterly, tears soaking through her fingers. Why? You were clearly a knight once. Why did you silently endure those beatings? You should have fought back. Medea sobbed uncontrollably, her body trembling in Nuriel's arms. Why didn't I know before? In this cold palace, only you genuinely cared for me. Only you were desperately protecting me. Nuriel looked down at Medea. Medea gently cupped Nuriel's face. This kind of thing will never happen again. Medea hugged Nuriel tightly, her arms fiercely wrapping around the other's neck, as if letting go. That will mean losing her again. I swear. Medea closed her eyes, letting tears flow freely through her blonde hair. I will never let the tragedy repeat itself. I promise. Medea hugged Nuriel tightly, the two standing in the center of the magnificent corridor. Sunlight pierced through the high windows, stretching their shadows. The next day, in the second district of the capital of Valdina, a manor stood behind a wall of red roses. The iron gates were tightly shut and sunlight bathed. The spired building. Boss. A young attendant pushed the door open and entered, holding a scroll in his hand, a smile hanging on his face. Quick, listen to today's amusing news. A major event happened in the Valdina royal family. That princess actually took it upon herself to viciously whip the maid chief. It's simply unbelievable. Cesare stood with his back to the door, facing the window, his short black hair, sharply outlined in the light and shadow. The cause was that the maid chief wanted to drive away the princess's maid. Cesare turned his face slightly, his golden pupils emitting a sharp light, the corners of his mouth curling into a smile. That maid is a disciple of the captain of the guard. It seems she has caught the regent's attention. Cesare reached out to stroke his jaw, his eyes flickering in the shadows. The maid chief whips the princess's maid, and the princess turns around and whips the maid chief. The young attendant unrolled the blue scroll and burst into laughter. I heard the maid chief fell down after just one strike. It seems that princess strikes quite heavily. Cesare whispered, repeating the title. Valdina actually still has a princess? That's right. The young attendant looked down and unrolled the scroll. She is the current king's only younger sister. Rumor has it that she is a cursed child and even caused the death of her own biological parents. Cursed? Cesare turned around. That's a story from 10 years ago. The attendant closed the scroll and recounted that royal secret. The late king and queen went to war together. It was a battle. They were sure to win. The young princess was left alone in the palace, writing letters expressing her longing for her parents. The king and queen were swayed by this and decided to depart for the palace immediately. However, they were ambushed on their way back and both died at the hands of assassins. The war subsequently ended in defeat, and the entire kingdom was plunged into turmoil. The Grand Empress Dowager called. The child of black sheep. The attendant opened a picture book, pointing at the twisted black shadows on it. The rumor of the cursed princess has thus circulated among the people for 10 years. To go to such great lengths for a child. Cesare turned his face slightly, a smirk curling the corners of his mouth. Those who have never seen a real curse sure talk a lot. Your Highness, boss. The young attendant suddenly stiffened, a layer of fine sweat breaking out on his forehead, his voice trembling in the spacious room. Is everything all right? The attendant cautiously observed and watched. Cesari's back. Cesare stood before the window, his right hand suddenly clenching into a fist, his knuckles cracking shivering under the leather glove. His body leaned forward slightly. It's been 3 years. Cesare looked down, staring at his right fingertips, which were trembling uncontrollably in the shadows. Ever since I contracted this damned petrification curse. Cesare stared intently at his fingertips. The once flexible joints were becoming stiff, as if rock was slowly growing beneath his skin. Cesare, you evil monster. Do you not know the meaning of fear? A cultist, pinned under 2 long swords, let out a final roar. The primordial darkness will never forgive you. Your blood will become as ice cold as your eyes. Your heart will become as pitch black as your mind. The cultist threw his head back and laughed maniacally. Black smoke that rose from the cracks in the ground. Even if you slay all your enemies with your talent and ambition, you cannot stop your own body from crumbling. The black aura of the curse wrapped around the iron armor. Cesare gripped his sword hilt, standing in the center of the surging shadows. Your Highness. The attendant retreated in terror, watching the armor being swallowed by the black mist. Cesare turned his head, his golden pupils flashing through the slit of his helmet. The black aura spread along his fingertips, and petrification veins crawled across his skin. You will watch yourself helplessly as you slowly turn into rubble and crumble. How pathetic. Valdina is actually famous for its bravery and martial prowess. Cesare stood by the window, looking down, his short black hair motionless in the light and shadow, possessing elite cavalry, yet in such a chaotic state. As expected, there's a reason for it. Cesare turned around, looking at the attendant behind the desk. That despised princess has finally awakened. I wonder how long she can hold on. The attendant hugged the scroll, revealing a smile his eyes. That's showing a hint of mockery. Should we continue to monitor the princess's estate? It's been a long time since we encountered something so interesting. The attendant took a step forward, waiting for orders. Cesare crossed his arms over his chest. Don't you have more important things to do? You should have already found that Sidian priestess who can break my curse. Actually, I'm still tracking her. The attendant lowered his head, avoiding eye contact, his voice echoing in the empty room. The last place she appeared was indeed Valdina. The trail went cold at the border. The attendant placed the scroll on the desk, finding a member of a long-extinct tribe. That is by no means an easy task. Even the Pope and the late Emperor failed to find her. The attendant continued to explain. Cesare suddenly drew the dagger from his waist, the blade reflecting a flash of white light in the sun. Cesare toyed with the sharp dagger. You talk too much. I swear, I have searched the entire border. She must be right here in this imperial city. The attendant raised his hands, backing away continuously, a layer of cold sweat seeping from his forehead. It better be so. Cesare held the dagger horizontally, the blade reflecting the attendant's terrified face, his golden pupils flashing on the blade's surface. If you're wrong. The attendant abruptly shrank his neck, repeatedly promising to verify it again, and turned to run toward the door. Oh, right, boss. The attendant pushed open the heavy wooden door and stopped, turning back to remind him. You have to make a trip to the royal palace this week. Don't forget to wear your mask when you go out. The attendant held onto the doorframe. His voice echoed in the corridor. You must conceal your identity. Cesare reached out and picked up a silver mask, his fingertips tracing the cold metal edge. Staring at the patterns on the mask, he slowly raised it, to his face. Actually, boss, the attendant stood at the door, continuing to mutter, don't you also think that face is your most perfect weapon? Hiding it under a mask is indeed a pity. Are you still talking nonsense? Cesare backhandedly sheathed the dagger, his golden pupils exuding a chilling intent. The attendant let out a yelp, and completely disappeared behind the door. Then goodbye. Cesare backhandedly threw the dagger. The sharp blade sliced through the air and accurately pierced the heavy wooden door panel. The attendant let out a miserable scream. The dagger buried itself a third of the way into the wooden door, the hilt vibrating violently. The attendant scrambled away down the corridor. The room returned to dead silence. Outside the window, the sunlight slanted in, shining deep into the Valdina royal palace. White curtains sliced through the light and shadow, and motes of dust drifted in the silence. Medea pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped into the spacious bedchamber. Lifting the black cloak, she revealed a pale, oval face. Medea walked toward the center of the room, her skirt gently brushing against the wooden floor. Approaching the ornate bed, she gazed at the sleeping figure. Medea reached out her right hand, her fingertips hovering in midair. She was sleeping soundly. She needed a good rest to recover. Medea stood by the bed, looking at Nuriel's heavily bandaged body. Fortunately, no bones are broken. This way, she can continue to wield her beloved longsword. Medea leaned over to inspect the injuries, her pupils reflecting Nuriel's tightly shut eyes. Her fingertips gently brushed past the edge of the bed. In this enormous palace, she is the first person I found and my only ally. Medea straightened up, her back to the faint light filtering through the window, the skirt of her gown, spreading out in the shadows. Therefore, in order to protect you, I must thoroughly reform this princess's estate. Medea turned her face slightly, her gaze sweeping across the spacious, dilapidated bedchamber, her eyes resting at the boundary of light and shadow. High heels stomped on the wooden floor, producing a heavy and hurried sound. Medea stood by the bed, listening to this string of noisy footsteps. Not approaching. Your Highness. Maru suddenly pushed open the door. Her long, curly red hair swayed with her violent movements, and anger burned in her black pupils. Her hands tightly gripped her red skirt. What on earth did I do wrong? Maru strode toward Medea, her footsteps echoing in the empty bedchamber. I merely went to rest as you instructed. Is that a mistake too? The first person to be purged is the maid chief, Maru. Medea slowly turned around, gazing at the out-of-control woman before her, her expression completely devoid of emotion. What is all this shouting about? Maru abruptly stopped in her tracks, her chest heaving violently with anger. You told me to go talk to the maid chief. I told her what happened at the tea party. Maru lifted her skirt, revealing legs covered in red scratch marks. Her skin looked shocking under the light. As a result, Madame Kajene suddenly rushed out and beat me. Maru pointed at her wounds, her voice turning shrill with agitation. Even my room has been taken over by Nuriel. This is utterly absurd. It looks like you're badly hurt. Medea stood still, her gaze sweeping over the red marks on Maru's legs. Remember to apply some ointment. What did you say? Maru froze in place, her pupils filled with astonishment. Medea turned sideways. Do you want me to apply it for you? Maru stammered and stepped back, her hands awkwardly clutching her skirt. No, I didn't mean that. She clearly still hadn't grasped the situation. Maru had always relied on her status as the wet nurse's daughter, comfortably enjoying my favor, even when wearing gorgeous clothes unsuited to her station, even when her words and actions were arrogant and rude. Medea slightly lowered her eyelids, concealing the disgust in her eyes. I once foolishly treated her as my only confidant, forgiving all her transgressions. Until the day the rebellion broke out. Medea turned her head, her gaze piercing toward Maru like a sharp blade. You, without hesitation, sold me out to the rebel army. Anyway, this is my room. Maru pointed at Nuriel lying on the bed. How could you do this without saying a single word to me? Medea slightly raised her chin. You sold my life to secure a position under my uncle's eager subordinates, and now you're throwing a massive tantrum at me over changing a room. Do I need your permission to take care of my own people? Maru backed away repeatedly, her hands flailing nervously in front of her chest. No, I didn't mean that. Medea turned around. My patience has reached its limit, yet your insolence only intensifies. Maru, it seems you are in too much pain to judge the current situation. Then go rest. You won't need to work anymore from now on. Mary's outstretched hand stopped in midair, her fingertips trembling violently. This is impossible. Maru tightly gripped her red skirt, her nails digging deeply into the fabric. She used to always kneel at my feet and beg. She is nothing but a bastard royal. Maru lowered her head, shadows obscuring her twisted face. With the lowly blood of a dancer flowing in her veins, how dare she treat me like this? Maru suddenly raised her head, her black pupils bloodshot. She let out a scream at Medea's departing back. Your Highness, please wait. Medea paid no mind to the clamor behind her. I told you to wait. Maru suddenly reached out to grab forward, her fingers twisted into a claw. Maru leaned forward, her black pupils dilated to the extreme with anger, and erupted in a shrill scream. You lunatic! A cold flash of light swept past. Medea stopped in her tracks and turned her head to look behind her. A few strands of severed red hair drifted down in the air. Stay away from her Highness. Nuriel had at some unknown point rolled out of bed. Her right hand held a blade horizontally, pressed deadly tight against Maru's throat. Nuriel's eyes were ice cold, her green pupils exuding intense, murderous intent. Her arm muscles were taut, the blade pressing an indentation into Maru's neck. The next strike will be your neck. Maryu's eyes widened. Are you crazy? How dare you lay a hand on me? The blade pressed tightly against her skin, slicing open a thin red line. Maru held her breath, her body stiffening in place, letting out a short gasp. Nuriel held the long sword horizontally, her upper body wrapped in white bandages. If you dare to touch a single finger of Her Highness again, that I will break all your fingers. Nuriel looked down at Maru, the sword pointing diagonally toward the ground, her eyes exuding intense, murderous intent. Maru stumbled backward, her high heels scraping against the wooden floor, producing a piercing noise. Maru clutched her throat and fled. Medea stood still, watching that wretched retreating figure. Medea turned her head. Nuriel, don't you need more rest? Nuriel sheathed her sword. I'm fine, this is nothing. A steel-like body, even when wounded and wielding the sword only with her left hand, had never wavered in the slightest. Nuriel stood before the mirror, her green pupils showing determination. This level of strength was enough to rival a 7-star knight. Medea turned around. Nuriel, from today onward, you are directly responsible for serving me. Nuriel bowed her head in a salute. Yes, Your Highness. Also, Medea turned her face slightly. Summon all the maids of the princess's palace. The maids stood in 2 rows in the hall, looking down at their toes, their hands folded in front of them. Medea sat in the center of the long bench, her gaze sweeping over their faces one by one. I summoned you today to assign new duties. Nuriel stood by Medea's side, her eyes locked forward. Medea pointed at 2 maids in the front row. From now on, you will be responsible for managing my gowns, and you will be in charge of managing my jewelry. The 2 maids suddenly looked up, their eyes showing astonishment. Us? They immediately lowered their heads and whispered to each other, "We are so lucky. Her Highness has finally recognized us." One maid took a half step forward, raising her right hand to signal. But, Your Highness, a strange thing happened when we went to collect supplies today. Medea leaned back. Go on. The maid frowned. Even though there was dry firewood piled up nearby, the supply officer insisted that we only take the damp and moldy firewood. That's right, another maid added. They also said that ordinary maids are strictly forbidden from entering the princess's palace again. Medea sighed softly, her right hand resting on her chest. It seems the maid chief is retaliating because I reprimanded her yesterday. Are the rumors true? The maids gathered together, lowering their heads and whispering. Did Her Highness really use a stick to teach the maid chief a lesson for Nuriel's sake? Fear spread through the crowd. This is my palace. You're my subjects. Medea leaned forward and opened a wooden box, her fingertips flicking the jewels piled inside, producing a crisp clinking sound. If it were any of you, I would have done the same. Medea lowered her eyelids. Due to the maid chief's malice, you will suffer during this time. I am very sorry. The maids stared at the box full of treasures, their throats swallowing involuntarily. I will never yield to the maid chief. The leading maid clenched her fists. If we swallow our pride now, she will think she can dominate us at will. Although I lack power and influence, Medea raised her head, I also do not wish to see you treated that way. I will go and beg my uncle to intervene. Therefore, please endure for a little while longer for the sake of this incompetent master of yours. No, Your Highness, since we know your heart, how could we resent you? The maids bowed their heads one after another, their voices intertwining in the hall. No matter how the maid chief makes things difficult, we will serve you with all our hearts. Very good. The corners of Medea's mouth turned up slightly. Thank you. The maids left happily. The large doors slowly closed behind them. Nuriel stood by the table. They are the ones constantly passing information to the outside. You gave those bat-like creatures too many rewards. Medea turned her face to look at the light filtering through the window. Precisely because of that, they must be dealt with. Nuriel frowned. What do you plan to do? The moment they leave the palace, they will sell the jewelry. Medea sat on the long bench. That is exactly what I want. Every piece of jewelry was given to me by my uncle. Medea opened her eyes, her pupils reflecting a sharp light. That is the bait for the trap and also the beginning of the reckoning. Medea looked down at the necklace on her chest. My uncle gave me these things, outwardly pretending to dote on his niece, but in reality, he wants to mold me into a squandering. An extravagant princess. Medea picked up the teapot, pouring red tea into the white porcelain cup. Very soon, the rumors will spread. Nuriel, Medea, turned her face. Aren't you curious? Just how capable is my uncle to suppress these rumors? Nuriel held the long sword at her waist, silently watching Medea. The light outside the window outlined their silhouettes. In the princess's palace, only the steam rising from the tea remained. Medea picked up the teacup, her fingertips gently rubbing the rim, exchanging a few tacky pieces of jewelry for the opportunity for him to take action personally. This is a very worthwhile trade. A few days later, the princess's jewelry flooded the market. Rumors spread like a tidal wave. People were whispering that those jewels came from the hands of the maids of the princess's palace. Why would a nation's princess have to rely on selling precious treasures to appease her subordinates? This voice rose and fell in the streets and alleys. Meanwhile, the maid chief's harassment never stopped. The focus of public opinion tightly locked onto the princess's palace and the maids who hoarded the jewelry. The rhetoric became increasingly sharp and presumptuous. The originally noble court was completely tainted by the scandal of insubordination. Have you heard? The maid chief is abusing the princess. The noble ladies fluttered their folding fans, covering the twisted smiles at the corners of their mouths. Malice fermented in the shadows. A young attendant pushed open the door, holding 2 blue scrolls in his hand. Boss, the Princess of Aldina is really being retaliated against miserably this time. That maid chief's methods are as despicable as the people from the West. Mixing sand into the food, smearing insect-attracting spices on the bedding. The rumors have become as exaggerated as a horror story. Cesare sat on the sofa, his pupils fixed on the chessboard. You have been too idle lately to actually have the mind to send someone to infiltrate the princess's palace. I just thought we might be able to dig up some useful intelligence there. The attendant shook open the blue scroll in his hand, producing a rustling sound. Oh, what a pitiful princess. I heard she can barely hold on anymore, and even gave the jewelry gifted by her uncle regent. To the maids. Cesare leaned forward. She handed over the jewelry. The attendant sat down across the chessboard. Yes, the market is flooded with black sapphires and tears of a lamb. Those nouveau riche. They're going crazy for them. Cesare remained silent, his golden pupils reflecting the white pieces on the chessboard. The candlelight flickered beside him. Is she naive or stupid? Does she really think she can buy people's hearts this way? Cesare picked up a black chess piece, suspending it in midair, his gaze piercing through the current situation on the board. What if she has another purpose? A pawn can become a threat. Cesare pushed a white piece to the bottom line. A crisp, clicking sound echoed in the room. Now she's a queen. Boss. The attendant abruptly stood up, his hands resting on the table. Why did you have to make that move? My bishop is completely doomed. Cesare remained silent. Staring intently at the endgame on the chessboard. Although rare, sometimes the weakest, most lowly creature can swallow everything. The question is, how will she change, and what will she devour? Or, will she be the one who is devoured? Cesare withdrew his hand, toying with the chess piece between his fingers, the corners of his mouth curling. Into a smirk. His golden pupils exuded a profound meaning. Truly interesting. Let me go. Where are you taking us? A scream tore through the dusk of the royal palace. The towering spires cast shadows in the afterglow. What on earth are you doing? A maid, bound by thick ropes, lost her balance while being dragged and fell heavily onto the stone floor. Why is this suddenly happening? She struggled to lift her head, the hemp rope digging into the fabric on her arms. Terrified, she looked forward. Kajene had her arms crossed over her chest. Since you have engaged in such reckless, death-seeking deeds, you have too much nonsense to say. From today onward, you no longer belong to the princess's palace. Countless palace maids have seen it with their own eyes. Kajene took a step forward, her eyes stern. You secretly colluded to bully her highness, and you actually tried to pin the blame on the maid chief. This is impossible. It's all lies. The bound maids struggled desperately. Those acts of bullying were clearly ordered by the maid chief, and we are innocent. Your highness, please save us. The maid chief is going to take us away and execute us. They turned their heads, looking toward the end of the corridor. Let me go. Her highness will never just sit by and watch. Your highness, your highness. The cries echoed in the courtyard. Kajene raised her hand to press her forehead, letting out a heavy sigh. What happened? Medea walked over slowly, looking toward the chaotic scene. Kajene bowed her body. Your Highness, you have suffered during this time. Although the maid chief realized it late, she has finally decided how to set things right. Those insolent women have been constantly sowing discord with the maid chief. Kajene straightened her body, her eyes returning to their sternness. How dare they insult the royal family? They must pay for their crimes with their lives. Medea gazed at the woman before her. I understand. You have worked hard. Kajene slightly lowered her head. Thank you for your understanding, Your Highness. I have also brought new maids over. They are children who just entered the palace. Kajene stepped aside to gesture. 3 young women bowed in greeting, lifting their skirts, their movements neat and uniform. Medea raised her hand, her fingertips lightly touching her jaw. That is truly wonderful. Since they are people personally selected by the maid chief, that they must be very reliable. All of you must remember clearly the scene you just witnessed. Medea turned around to face the rows of standing maids. Those who betray their masters and act like bats will end up being dragged away and executed like dogs. Do you understand? The maids replied in unison. Yes, Your Highness, we will certainly keep it in mind. Medea stepped away. Please convey my gratitude to the maid chief. Kajene suddenly looked up. What did you say? Medea turned her face slightly. Thanks to her, my hands are perfectly clean. Kajene froze in place, sweat sliding down her cheeks. Why? Why did she smile like that? Could it be that from the very beginning, she was using the maid chief? That to purge dissidents? Medea walked forward, surrounded by 2 maids, her hands hanging naturally at the sides of her skirt, her pace steady. Outside the window, the courtyard was empty. The 3 maids that were escorted far away. Medea stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the aftermath outside. Nuriel called out softly from behind. Your Highness, did you anticipate that the maid chief would do this? Medea turned around. Yes, those nobles who lost their informants will begin to resent my uncle, and my uncle will suspect the maid chief and his political enemies. Medea raised her hand to stroke the hair at her temples. Who do you think my uncle hates more right now? Is it those nobles or that maid chief? Nuriel tightly gripped the collar at her chest, her throat moving slightly as she swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Your Highness, Medea looked out the window again. At the very least, it definitely won't be me. Nuriel gazed at the back before her. Is Her Highness instigating them to fight among themselves? You are like a completely different person from before. Medea held onto the windowsill, her fingertips tracing the wood grain. You are right. The Medea you knew is gone. Medea stood before the window. Only standing on the edge of death did I realize that I cannot be foolish forever. Foolish forever. Medea turned her head, the corners of her mouth slightly raised. And you, Nuriel? Do you hate a master like this? Nuriel stood in the shadows, her hands tightly clasped. She looked up at Medea, her eyes in the light and shadow. Firm. The Medea in her memory was pure, more dazzling than her noble status. I once wanted to protect that innocence forever. But Nuriel closed her eyes and dropped on one knee. I will pledge my loyalty to you. No matter what you become, Your Highness, I will stay by your side. Nuriel lowered her head and pressed it against the back of Medea's hand. Her eyes were immersed in the shadows. This was an oath. Medea looked down at the kneeling Nuriel. I understand. I am very pleased. Medea reached out, her fingertips gently touching Nuriel's forehead. The 2 stood in the strong light of the floor-to-ceiling window. Having dealt with her uncle and the maid chief for too long in her past life, she had long grown tired of it. Medea sat on the red sofa, flipping through the pages in her hands. I can accurately predict their thoughts and their next moves. Medea closed the book, her eyes calm. What truly worries me are the situations I have never encountered before. A porcelain cup fell to the ground and shattered, splashing tea onto the red carpet. Maru froze by the table, staring at the fragments on the floor. Maru let out a gasp, her hands tightly clenched against her chest, looking down at Medea. Maru picked up the white teapot. I'm sorry, Your Highness. My hand slipped. I will pour you another cup immediately. Medea watched Maru's actions, her pupils slightly contracting. This kind of variable had never appeared in her memory. Maru picked up the teapot. This is your favorite berry tea. I brewed it for you myself. She poured the berry juice into the porcelain cup, the dark liquid swirling inside. Maru stared at the surface of the cup. I deliberately lowered the temperature. You like to let it cool a bit before drinking, right? Medea stared at the reflection in the cup. I don't want to drink it right now. Just leave it. Maru picked up the teacup and leaned closer, her hands tightly gripping the cup. I want to pick these berries early in the morning. My knees. We're soaked with dew. Just take one sip, okay? Maru pressed the rim of the cup against Medea's lips. Drink it quickly. Pour it into her mouth. A scream flashed through Medea's mind. It was the lingering image of her mother being forced to drink poison. I said enough. Medea waved her hand, sweeping it across. Her fingertips struck the porcelain cup with a crisp sound. The dark tea exploded in the air, and the porcelain cup flew out of her hand. Maru let out a scream. Medea stood up. It seems you intend to turn a deaf ear to my words. How many times do I have to repeat myself? Maru slumped to the ground, her pupils trembling with fear. Your Highness, Maru knelt prostrate beside the broken porcelain pieces. Please forgive me, Your Highness. I made a mistake. Medea stood in the shadows, looking down at the mess at her feet. Take Maru away. I was wrong. Maru was dragged toward the door by the guards. Please don't hate me, Your Highness. I beg you. Medea raised her hand, pressing her forehead, and let out a heavy sigh. Nuriel hurried into the room. Your Highness, are you all right? Medea sat back in her chair. It's nothing. Medea closed her eyes tightly, her lips pressed together. Her breathing rose and fell into silence. Nuriel stopped and stood behind Medea, watching her master's back. Medea sat on the sofa. Nuriel stared at where Maru had been. Nuriel knelt on one knee. Do you want me to keep an eye on her? She was wearing a beautiful bracelet. Medea slightly turned her head. That is something she absolutely cannot afford. Medea stood up, her skirt sweeping over the broken porcelain on the floor. Her purple eyes shone in the shadows. The messy tea reflected her image. Trumpet creepers. Maru's wrist flashed in the darkness, the red gemstone refracting a faint light. That was a crest design that only members of the Kajene Empire's royal family could possess. Well done, Maru. Maru, wearing a black cloak, walked briskly through the empty corridor. The heavy iron doors were pushed open to both sides, and light poured out from the crack. Maru stood at the boundary of light and shadow, her shadow elongating on the ground. The late-night streets were dead silent. Maru, now wearing a blue cloak, had her footsteps echoing on the cobblestone road. Passing through a row of wooden buildings, Maru pushed open a heavy wooden door. Her blue cloak brushed past the doorframe, her hands tightly gripping the edge of the door. Maru. Seaman stood by the window, his short blonde hair appearing silver in the moonlight. His broad back blocked most of the light. He turned his head and called out softly. Maru took off her winter hood. Seaman, I missed you so much. Seaman turned around, a faint smile on his lips, watching the woman running toward him. The young Duke of the Claudio family, Seaman Claudio. Please become a useful bait. What happened? I heard all of Medea's maids were replaced. Seaman stood in the shadows. Maru stepped forward. Darling, I had no choice. The princess suddenly pushed me away. What could I do? Maru grabbed Seaman's sleeve, her fingertips tightening forcefully. Seaman grabbed Maru's shoulders in return. Wait, Medea pushed you away? His brown eyes suddenly contracted. What do you mean by that? Maru panted heavily. That was just when the maids were being replaced. She said she was worried the maid chief would retaliate against her. Now she values me again. The corners of Maru's mouth curled up, and she wrapped her arms around Seaman's waist. You should know how much the princess relies on me. Seaman looked down at Maru, his hands firmly pressing on her shoulders. Inside and outside the palace, things are in an uproar because of the maid chief. It's truly exhausting. Seaman suddenly applied force. If you want to marry me, then be smart, my love. Maru let out a muffled groan. Don't ruin my reason for marrying a commoner. Seaman reached out and grabbed Maru's hair, forcing her to look up. You must be my dear cousin's most favored maid. Do you understand? Maru closed one eye tightly, her long red hair pulled back taut. Yes. Her voice trembled in her throat. I will do better. I will find out Princess Medea's every move. Maru quickly expressed her loyalty. Darling, very good. Seaman released his grip, watching the submissive prey in front of him. Seaman leaned down closer. I love you, Maru. Seaman kissed Maru's lips, his arms wrapping around her waist. Maru's black eyes widened, her body stiffly enduring the kiss. Seaman turned his head, staring at the red gemstone bracelet on her wrist. Maru closed her eyes, her arms tightly wrapping around the man's back, her fingertips digging into the white fabric. I love you too. I am willing to do anything for you. Maru tightened her arms. The red gemstone refracted a faint light under the moonlight. Her body trembled in Seaman's embrace. In the shadows, outside the window, a figure, stood completely still. Nuriel knelt on one knee. Maru met with the young duke privately, Your Highness. Medea had her back to the light, hidden in the shadows. I know. Nuriel lowered her head and pressed her chest. If that bracelet is a gift from the duke, it means the Claudio family is secretly in contact with the Kajene Empire's royal family. Medea slightly turned her head. Let's observe for now. More importantly, Nuriel straightened her back, waiting for the next order. Yes, Your Highness. Medea stood before the high window, her purple eyes revealing a cold glint. Your master, Marquis Giliphus. Now where is he now? Nuriel replied in a low voice. He is at a small manor outside the city. Nuriel looked up and asked, Are you planning to meet him? Medea dragged her long dress toward the shadows. Yes, because Valdina needs him. Nuriel, the Claudio Duchy, is not just in contact with the Kajene Empire. Saman might not realize it yet, but the bracelet he gave Maru to please her is ironclad proof of treason. Medea stood by the window, her eyes staring into the void. Uncle believes that now is the best time to usurp the throne, while Peleus is away on an expedition. Nuriel suddenly looked up, her eyes widening in shock. You mean to say Duke Claudio is plotting a rebellion? The Emperor of the Kajene Empire does not want Valdina to become stronger. Medea turned sideways. The expedition initiated by Peleus was also to break free from the Empire's control. Therefore, my brother has become the common enemy of both the Empire and Uncle. Medea lowered her eyes slightly, her long hair covering half of her face. This is the reason they joined forces. In my past life, a harsh winter swept through Valdina. The Kajene Empire had promised food aid, but at the last moment, they broke their promise. The angry citizens pointed their fingers at King Peleus. A rebellion broke out. Torches burned in the streets, illuminating the twisted faces of the rioters. That was a manipulated rebellion. Duke Claudio planted disguised rioters to push the country into the abyss. Nuriel stood in the center of the hall. Is the Kajene Empire not afraid of retaliation? No matter how powerful a country is, to openly target the monarch of another nation. Medea raised her hand to brush back her long hair, a faint smile appearing on her lips. That is why we must stop it in advance. That Marquis was once the captain of the Royal Guard and a national hero. He will be useful. Medea stood before the high window. Nuriel, secretly arrange a meeting between me and Marquis Giliphus. Nuriel knelt on one knee. Yes, Your Highness. Please allow me to start preparing immediately. She then stood up and exited the hall. Medea turned her face. In this life, I will ensure they never cross that wall alive. Sunlight spilled onto the spires of the White Castle. The fountain rose and fell in the courtyard. Catherine bowed to greet her. My respects to you, Your Highness. Medea stood in the ornate hall, looking at the woman in front of her. It has been a long time. Duchess, please don't call me so distantly, Your Highness. Catherine Claudio reached out and tightly held Medea's hands. I was terrified when I heard the news of your fall from the horse. Because of the exhausting journey, I also fell ill. Please forgive me for only coming to see you now. Catherine lowered her eyes. It couldn't be helped, Mother. Verna pushed open the heavy doors and walked into the room, holding up her skirt. Medea turned her head, her pupils slightly contracting. Verna stopped in her tracks. My generous sister will surely understand this situation, right? Medea called out softly. Verna. Verna quickly walked into the room. I missed you so much, sister. I begged Mother for a long time before she allowed me to come. You understand, right? Medea sat upright on the sofa. Of course. Her long hair hung over her gorgeous dress, her eyes as calm as water. I miss you too, unforgettably. Medea lowered her eyes slightly. These are the enemies who destroyed my family and my country. Whenever I think of Leah and Lien, I wish I could tear them to pieces right now. Medea's hands were folded on her lap, her knuckles turning white from the force. But now is not the time. I will slowly, tightly put the noose around your neck. Medea stared at Verna's back until you fall into extreme agony. Catherine leaned in to ask, her eyes full of concern. Your Highness, does her head still hurt? Although you look fine on the outside, the after effects of falling from a horse must never be taken lightly. I brought a doctor with me. He is a publicly recognized miracle doctor from the Kajene Empire. Because he is a citizen of the Empire, we couldn't bring him in rashly. He is waiting outside the palace gates right now. If you permit, I will have him come in immediately. Medea remained silent, allowing an enemy country's doctor to enter the royal palace. How could such a thing possibly be allowed? Verna rested her hands on her knees. Mother went through a lot of trouble to invite him over. Sister, you can't even imagine how many chests of gold coins she spent. Catherine turned her head. Verna, don't say such unnecessary things. It will make His Highness feel burdened. Medea leaned back against the sofa. So that's how it is, to invite someone from so far away. Aunt must have suffered a lot. Verna stood up. Of course. She even went to the Kazan Empire in person. Sometimes I don't even know who the real daughter is. Medea suddenly looked up. Aunt went in person. The two countries are still at war. That strict Chancellor Cesare actually allowed it? Catherine stood up and scolded Verna. Verna shrank her shoulders in fright, her eyes full of terror. Catherine put on a smiling face again. Please do not worry, Your Highness. He is the accompanying doctor for the soon-to-visit Kazan delegation. He just came to visit in advance. His identity has already undergone strict verification. Medea withdrew her tightly held hands. I understand, Aunt, but the court doctor has already confirmed that I'm fine. Medea folded her hands on her lap and straightened her back. You can rest assured, since Your Highness says so. Catherine lowered her head, clenching her teeth. Her long hair covered half of her face, and her hands suddenly clenched on her knees, her knuckles turning white from the force. Catherine looked up. I feel a little sad. Are you doubting the doctor I brought? I have always treated Your Highness as my own. Catherine raised her hand to lightly wipe the corner of her eye. Why must you always keep a distance from me and act so aloof? Treated me as her own? How could she say such a thing? Medea sat upright in the shadows, coldly staring at the woman in front of her. In the past, I foolishly thought this was true love. Medea slowly stood up. Please forgive me, Aunt. I appreciate your good intentions, but those words cannot resonate with me. Sister, what exactly is wrong with you today? Verna suddenly stood up. How could you say such things to Mother? Medea stood by the window. Because I cannot agree with Aunt's words. Catherine looked up, her eyes full of shock. What exactly are you saying? Medea turned around. You know very well what kind of treatment I have been subjected to ever since my conflict with the maid chief. Catherine suddenly froze. Medea stepped forward. I merely said a few unpleasant words, and you noticed immediately. But all the maids around me were replaced, and you didn't know it all? 3 unfamiliar maids stood side by side, their hands folded in front of their black aprons, looking down to avoid eye contact. Medea stopped in her tracks. I understand. The maid chief is your confidant. Being caught between her and me must have put you in a very difficult position, right? Your Highness, that's not how it is. Catherine rested her hands on the table. Her eyes were full of anxiety. Medea turned and walked toward Nuriel. If it were Verna who was wronged, would Aunt still be able to maintain this level of calmness? Medea slowly raised her head. You may treat me as your own daughter, but I will never be able to become your biological daughter. This fact truly makes me feel very sad. Medea released her fingertips, and a white silk handkerchief fell to the ground. Please leave. I do not wish to see you again today. Your Highness, please wait a moment. Catherine suddenly lunged forward, her outstretched right hand suspended in midair. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut, isolating the noise. Outside the corridor, why did you have to run your mouth and say all that nonsense? Catherine turned around abruptly. Verna shrank into a corner of the sofa, trembling slightly, her eyes welling up. With tears, I thought I had completely tamed her. Was it still not enough? Catherine raised her hand to her forehead. If that woman Kajene could have restrained herself a little, things would never have turned out like this. I absolutely cannot let the beast I raised with my own hands escape, just like this. Catherine clenched her teeth. Catherine rested her chin on one hand. First, Kajene must be punished as a warning to others. Faster, even faster. Maru, wearing a black cloak, squatted in front of a dim wardrobe. Maru reached into the wardrobe, her fingertips holding a blue silk handkerchief, and stuffed it deep into the clothes. This feeling is like being entangled by slime. I can even smell that foul stench. The maid chief is truly ruthless. Maru withdrew her hand, her black eyes full of disgust. To actually want to pair that person up with the princess. Count Lark Etienne. That fat man stood among piles of gold coins, his fingers covered in gold rings. He was a third-generation hereditary noble and the regent's right-hand man. Maru stood in the shadows, watching the Count raise his glass on the dance floor. He's a greedy bastard. Just looking at him makes me sick. As long as I hide this handkerchief in the wardrobe, Medea is completely finished. Maru closed the wardrobe door, her curly red hair disappearing into the darkness. A glint of cold light flashed in her black eyes. This will become the most explosive gossip in the palace. Maru tightly gripped the silk handkerchief in her hand. Serves her right for being unlucky. If she gets into a scandal with that 50-year-old toad, whether she's a royal or not, she can forget about ever getting married in this life. Maru squatted in the shadows, thinking that her marriage prospect was Count Etienne. She found it laughable. Maru reached out to touch the cold wardrobe door, and scenes from the past surfaced. Once, we also had a close relationship. Maru sat on the ground, her fingertips digging into the silk handkerchief. I heard. The princess has abandoned you. To think you've now been reduced to working with the low-ranking maids. Maru turned her face. That idiot Nuriel has already taken your place. Do you really think being abandoned by the regent is a bad thing? Kajene stood in the moonlight. Shouldn't you find a way to survive? Maru looked up. No matter what, she is still a member of the royal family. Aren't you afraid of divine retribution? Kajene stepped forward. As long as this matter is handled beautifully, everything will take a turn for the better. I will have you. Adopted by a noble family. Kajene stood in the shadows, her eyes revealing a strict gaze. My husband's nephew doesn't have an heir yet. As long as you serve as an adopted daughter in that family for a few years. Quijen's mouth curled up, that you can become a true noble lady. When that time comes, you can openly be Saemon's lover. Maru suddenly clenched the silk handkerchief. Her knuckles turned white from the force. Maru looked down at the silk handkerchief, then threw it deep in a drawer. Please do not resent me. Maru reached out and pushed the drawer shut. Your Highness, just as you said, it was you who abandoned me first. Nuriel stood before the open door panels, gazing at the bright light outside. Sunlight pierced through the lush tree canopy, spilling onto the grand spires of the palace. Black birds swept across the sky, and fallen leaves danced in the tranquil courtyard. Nuriel stood under the empty corridor. Everything is exactly as you predicted, Your Highness. Last night, Maru indeed made contact with the maid chief. I saw her sneak into your bedroom and hide something in the wardrobe. Nuriel took this silk handkerchief from her chest. This is the item she hid. Medea glanced over the crest on the fabric. So it's Count Etienne. It seems the maid chief is truly out of options. Medea looked down to examine the silk handkerchief, her eyes revealing a cold glint. Nuriel clenched her teeth. Those despicable scoundrels. How dare they? Your Highness, I can make 2 or 3 people disappear without a trace. Nuriel took a step forward. As long as you give the order. Medea reached out and pressed down on the hilt of Nuriel's sword. Including the minister, that would be 3. Then you wouldn't be safe either. Nuriel bowed her head. Your Highness is my master, and also my benefactor. I'm even willing to lay down my life for you. Nuriel suddenly pressed her chest, her expression resolute. Medea quietly watched her, her eyes flickering slightly. What should I do with this stubborn girl? Medea lowered her eyes. She looks like she's ready to rush out and risk her life at any moment. Calm down. Now is not the time. Medea reached out and placed her hand on Nuriel's shoulder. More importantly, Nuriel, aren't you confident in your stealth abilities? Medea leaned close to her ear, her eyes revealing calculation. Nuriel bowed her head to accept the order. Yes, Your Highness. Medea turned and walked deeper into the room. Then let's return the maid chief's gift to her. Her cloak trailed across the wooden floor. Her leather boots stepped on the corridor floor, making a crisp sound. At that moment, Nuriel suddenly stopped in her tracks, her expression shocked. Medea stood by the window, her fingertips toying with that item. A new maid handed this to me. She said she felt Maru had stolen my bracelet. Medea lowered her eyes, sweeping over the stolen item in her hand. She claimed she picked it up off the floor. That kind of thing she could never afford. She would probably show it off everywhere as a gift from her lover. I should return it to its rightful owner. But for it to stay alone would be too lonely. Wrap it in Etienne's handkerchief. Medea folded the silk handkerchief and the bracelet together. Stuff it into Maru's luggage. Reaching out to take the folded fabric, Nuriel bowed her head to accept the order. Understood. Medea pulled up the hood of her cloak. Let's go. Didn't you say someone would take us to the Marquis' manor? Yes. My colleague is waiting outside with a carriage right now. Nuriel followed closely behind. Is this colleague you mentioned also a disciple of Marquis Giliphus? Medea walked through the empty corridor. Yes, although he's a bit arrogant, his skills are exceptional. Nuriel turned her face and smiled. I believe Your Highness will definitely take a liking to him. The setting sun hung at the edge of the stone wall, its afterglow penetrating the dense tree canopy, illuminating that hidden wooden side door. The surroundings were dead silent. Boots all stepped over dry grass, making fine rustling sounds. Medea stopped in the shadow of the stone wall, scrutinizing the man in front of her. I really didn't expect to see a member of the royal family using this side door. Tom leaned against the carriage, his short blonde hair shining in the sunlight. This is the door we knights usually use to sneak out. Medea stood in place, coldly sizing him up without saying a word. He really is arrogant. Nuriel stood beside Medea, a trace of helplessness flashing in her eyes. Hello there, your highness. Tom leaned against the black carriage. I thought Nuriel had dug another new tunnel. For a lowly person like me to wait for you shouldn't be a big deal, right? Nuriel took a step forward. The person in front of you is her highness. Show some respect, Tom. Nuriel clenched her teeth, her green eyes glaring dead at him, her breathing becoming heavy. Tom tilted his head, a mocking curve forming at the corner of his mouth. Nuriel suddenly stepped forward. You brat, this level is still easy to deal with. Medea pulled back her hood, the corners of her mouth slightly raised. Compared to the contempt and neglect I suffered in my past life, this is simply too cute. It's fine, Nuriel. Medea was as calm as water. She curtsied slightly in greeting. I'm glad to meet you. I will be in your care until we reach the territory. Alahite. Tom froze in place, subconsciously lowering his head to avoid her gaze. Medea lifted her skirt, her leather boots stepping onto the carriage step, making a dull wooden sound. Nuriel reached out to hold the carriage door, watching her master board with swift movements. Medea sat deep inside the carriage, her eyes looking forward. Let's depart to Marquis Giliphus's manor. The setting sun sank into the mountain ridge, its afterglow painting the red-tiled roofs of the Giliphus territory. Windmill blades rotated slowly in the twilight. The town streets extended into the distant shadows. By the floor-to-ceiling window of the Marquis's manor, an old man stood with his hands behind his back. His short gray hair appeared silver gray in the setting sun. His broad back blocked most of the light. The old man stood motionless, as if waiting for the carriage that was about to arrive. The carriage sped through the wilderness camp. Its wheels rolled over dry sand and dirt, kicking up clouds of dust. The sound of horse hooves echoed among the tents. The carriage suddenly jolted violently, the wooden axle making a piercing screech. A wheel sank into a dirt pit, forcing the carriage to stop in the middle of the wasteland. Tom pulled tight on the reins, his eyes sweeping over the damaged wheel. He let out a short exclamation. His leather boots landed heavily on the ground as Tom jumped down from the driver's seat. He bent over to inspect the detached axle. Looks like the wheel came off. He patted the wooden door of the carriage. I will fix it as soon as possible. Nuriel sat in the dim carriage. That bastard, but I've really had enough. Nuriel turned to the dark figure beside her, bowing her head in apology. I am deeply sorry, your highness. I will teach him a lesson. Medea leaned against the soft cushions of the carriage, responding in a flat tone. It's fine, Nuriel. Medea reached out to pull back the curtain. She stared out the window without saying a word. Medea looked toward the camp and asked, Are those retired soldiers? Nuriel replied, Yes, your highness. Nuriel looked down at the floor. As the war drags on, their numbers are constantly increasing. Some stay here with their families, others have had their hometowns destroyed or disabled. Nuriel watched the wounded soldiers walking with canes, her voice echoing in the narrow carriage. They have nowhere else to go. Medea turned her face, her eyes observing the camp through the gap. Her gaze lingered on those dilapidated tents. The carriage shook violently again. Jason shouted loudly outside the carriage, his short blonde hair flashing in the sunlight. We're setting off again. Marquis Giliphus's manor stood among the trees, its white stone walls reflecting a cold light in the sun. Neatly trimmed bushes surrounded the building. The carriage stopped at the grand porch. Marquis Giliphus stood in front of the bookshelf, his right hand resting on his chest, bowing slightly to greet her highness. Medea sat on the carved wooden chair, looking at the old man opposite her. It has been a long time, Marquis. Marquis Giliphus sits back on the sofa, his hands folded on his lap. His gaze sweeps across Medea's face. You have grown quite a lot. Medea sits upright in the shadows. You haven't changed a bit, Marquis Giliphus. He remains silent, just quietly staring at the young woman, Medea, sitting upright in the armchair. Her pupils are as calm as water, looking like a docile young deer. To think she was the one who beat the maid chief for Nuriel. Marquis Gilifus watches the girl in front of him, his gaze wandering through her silvery white hair. Marquis Gilifus suddenly stands up, pressing his right hand firmly against his chest. Your Highness, please do not be swayed by the words of those people. They are only using you for their own interests. Medea lowers her head in silence. Didn't I tell you? You must listen to the pleas of the people. I have heard everything from my uncle. She tightly grips the collar of her dress with both hands. You want my seal? I will never listen to you again. Medea shouts loudly, her true nature hard to change. He must have come because of the maid chief incident. Marquis Gilifus slightly narrows his eyes, his cold gaze locked onto Medea. Valdina has already lost its light. I fear it will never shine again. Marquis Gilifus turns around, his back slightly hunched in the shadows. I have absolutely no intention of getting involved in this power struggle again. Marquis Gilifus looks down at the ground, his hands hanging by his sides. His voice echoes in the spacious study. Let's end the pleasantries here. Since you have come from afar, I will speak frankly. I have long been away from political affairs and have no plans to return. Marquis Gilifus lowers his eyes, avoiding her gaze. I am very sorry. I cannot help. Medea turns her head to look out the window. I understand. I completely understand your position. However, Medea reaches out and presses the scroll on the desk, her fingertips resting against the wax seal. That is not my request. Although it is not much, I am mobilizing all my wealth. Medea slightly lowers her head. I hope you can take charge of building housing for retired soldiers in the royal capital. Medea looks directly into the old man's eyes, her tone steady as usual. What did you say? Marquis Gilifus suddenly freezes, his gray eyebrows raised, his gaze fixed dead on the scroll. Marquis Gilifus leans forward. Housing? You mean within the royal capital? Medea sits upright in the center of the sofa. Why are you so surprised? You even purposely had the carriage stop. You wanted me to notice their existence. Your Highness, the people around you do not welcome them. Sweat seeps from Marquis Gilifus's forehead. So, I thought you would notice. Fingertips lightly touching the edge of the porcelain cup. Medea picks up the black tea, fine ripples forming in the liquid. Just because someone covers their eyes and ears doesn't mean they know nothing. The royal family now lacks the means, and the nobles turn away because there is no profit. Medea puts down the teacup. This makes you the only candidate, Marquis. You're the only one who can be entrusted with this task. Medea turns her face, her pupils bottomless in the interplay of light and shadow. You know very well that this is a task with neither resources nor rewards. Marquis Gilifus suddenly stands up. So why offer all your wealth? Because I am the princess of Valdina. Medea sits upright in the armchair, her right hand pressing against her chest. I am merely fulfilling the duties of a princess. Marquis Gilifus freezes in place, his gaze locked onto the girl in front of him. The study falls into dead silence. Medea lowers her eyes. In her past life, famine and harsh living conditions caused the anger of the retired soldiers to constantly swell. Torches illuminated the pitch-black streets as wounded soldiers hobbled forward on crutches. Their anger eventually pointed towards a nation. The heroes who once defended the country turned into rebels. I must ensure they will never join the uprising again. Medea looks back at the old man. Of course, I could have asked Chancellor Cesare to handle this, but he does not care about the soldiers like you do. I trust you, Marquis. Medea slightly tilts her head. I trust your utter devotion to the people. Marquis Gilifus faces the light, his back, straight in the shadows. His gray hair glimmers in the dimness, his hands gripping the chair. Back tightly, Medea opens her eyes, her eyelashes trembling lightly in the light and shadow. Marquis Gilifus picks up his teacup, his right hand steadily holding the saucer, his fingertips tracing the edge of the porcelain, his gaze falling into the rising steam. The Marquis sits in the shadows by the window, his gray hair outlined against the backlight, his right hand supporting his chin, deep in thought. Outside the window, clouds roll across the horizon. A carriage bumps along a forest road, its wheels rolling over gravel, making a muffled sound. Medea sits inside the swaying carriage, looking down and flipping through. The paper's in her hand. Your Highness, are you all right? Nuriel sits opposite and asks in a low voice. Medea closes the documents in her hands, her fingertips pressing firmly on the edges of the paper. I'm fine. To be honest, I don't understand. Retired soldiers are originally the royal family's responsibility. Why intervene? Nuriel pulls down her black hood, her pupils filled with calm. Fusion. Medea turns her head slightly. Are you worried that I will become penniless? If I really go bankrupt, I'll just go and serve you. Valdina becomes strong, and after I go bankrupt, you support me. That doesn't sound too bad. Nuriel lowers her head, sitting in the corner of the carriage, her hands tightly folded on her lap, revealing complex motions. It was clearly just a joke, so why does it sound so harsh? Is it because of your detached attitude? As if your own safety is of no importance at all. Nuriel remains silent, her fingertips pressing hard into her palms. Medea turns her head to look out the window, her purple pupils reflecting the passing scenery, her expression returning to calm. More importantly than that, Nuriel, are the handkerchief and bracelet ready? Medea slightly raises her chin. Nuriel responds in a low voice. They have been handled according to your orders. The carriage speeds under the setting sun, its wheels rolling over the forest path, startling. A flock of birds. Medea turns her head to look out the window. It should be soon. No, perhaps it's already in utter chaos. Sunlight pierces through the clouds, illuminating the magnificent white palace. The domed building stands solemn in the light and shadow, and statues guard the tightly closed gates. What did you just say? What was found in the princess's bedroom? The Empress Dowager sits on a high-backed chair, her hands tightly gripping a peacock feather. Fan. Kajene kneels in the shadows and reports. Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager. I'm very sorry. Is Count Etienne's handkerchief? Kajene slightly lowers her head, a smirk forming at the corner of her mouth. It seems love has also found Princess Medea. This is simply a disgrace to public morals. The Empress Dowager suddenly stands up from the armchair, her hands tightly gripping the handle of the feather fan, her knuckles turning white from the force. This directly concerns the dignity of the royal family. Summon Medea immediately. The Empress Dowager roars in the center of the hall, her voice echoing in the empty corridors. The Empress Dowager clenches her jaw. Today, I will absolutely not let that girl off easily. Her Highness Princess Medea has arrived. The attendant's voice rings out outside the door. Medea steps into the hall, looking straight ahead. Medea greets grandmother. She bows slightly in greeting, her hands folded in front of her. The Empress Dowager leans forward from her seat, her right hand tightly gripping the feather fan. Her voice erupts in the spacious room. Kneel before me. Medea stands silently, her hands tightly gripping the hem of her dress. Did you hear me? I told you to kneel and beg for mercy. The Empress Dowager roars as she stands up, veins bulging on her forehead. Medea softly responds, I will follow grandmother's orders. Her knees slowly bend. Medea kneels on the cold floor and gazes upwards. I would like to ask the reason for your sudden anger, grandmother. I worry that excessive anger will damage your health. Do you really not know? Still playing the fool at this point. The Empress Dowager suddenly tightens her grip on the feather fan, her teeth tightly clenched, making a grinding sound. The maid chief has confessed everything. You have been secretly exchanging affections with a man. The Empress Dowager waves her arm, pointing at her kneeling granddaughter. Her voice echoes in the spacious hall, the edge of the feather fan leaving an afterimage in the air. Catherine stands to the side, silent, her fingertips unconsciously digging into her palms. There is absolutely no man approaching Medea. The princess's marriage is a precious strategic chess piece. I have been closely monitoring everything. Catherine lowers her head to avoid everyone's gaze, a trace of doubt flashing in her green pupils. If I must guess a possible reason, Catherine slightly turns her head, scoffing coldly in her heart. Kajene acting on her own? What on earth are you thinking, Kajene? Kajene steps forward, her deep purple gown sweeping across the floor, her hands folded in front of her abdomen. I sincerely apologize to you. Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager. Kajene stops, her right hand resting on the purple gem on her chest. When I noticed Her Highness the Princess sneaking out, Her Highness tried to silence me, even spreading rumors that I was persecuting her. But as a loyal servant of Valdina, I could not turn a blind eye to the truth. Kajene suddenly turns around, her right hand pointing at Maru behind her. This child is the witness. I am Maru, Her Highness Princess Medea's maid. Maru lifts her black skirt and bows forward in greeting. Whenever Her Highness secretly met with her lover, she would bring me along. Maru, stand behind the kneeling Medea. Maru lets out a soft sob. I once tried to dissuade Her Highness, saying it was wrong, but Her Highness fired me because of it. I'm sorry, Your Highness. Please, you must not forgive me. Maru rubs the corners of her eyes, her pupils stealing glances forward. Medea kneels in the shadows, silent. You are truly becoming more and more insolent. Medea, the Empress Dowager, suddenly turns her head and roars, her pupils bloodshot with anger. That old fossil is completely mad with anger. After all, the partner is Etienne. Maru glances sideways at the furious Empress Dowager. Perhaps she will be locked up in a convent for the rest of her life. Maru stares at the kneeling figure from behind. Medea sits alone in the center of the beam of light. See, why did you have to drive me away first? Maru turns her head to look behind her. Medea slowly speaks. If I truly made a mistake, I will gladly accept the punishment. Medea raises her head and looks straight ahead. But this is indeed a bizarre coincidence. Lady Kajene was punished by me not long ago for violating royal laws. And Maru, as a child, I distanced myself from due to her slack work and constant troublemaking. Maru suddenly shrinks her shoulders, her pupils filled with anger. Medea locks on a Kajene head. Grandmother, can you really be certain that they are telling the truth? Kajene bursts into a cold sneer. Ha, the evidence is conclusive, yet you still dare to quibble. Kajene suddenly pushes Maru forward. This child will testify. Maru screams, puffing out her chest. The handkerchief, that is the lover's token treasured by her highness. The Empress Dowager raises her white-gloved left hand to press against her wrinkled forehead. Enough. I have already ordered a search of the princess's bedchamber. The Empress Dowager's voice echoes in the empty hall. Wait for Pignatelli to come in. The main doors are pushed open heavily, the crashing sound echoing in the corridor. Pignatelli steps in and bows deeply in greeting. Paying respects to your majesty, the Empress Dowager. Baroness Pignatelli, I have returned after executing your orders. The Empress Dowager sits upright on her high seat. Come, Pignatelli. You have worked hard. Pignatelli bows her head in greeting. I was merely acting according to your will. The Empress Dowager crosses her arms, her right hand tightly gripping the feather fan. So, did you find the evidence? Pignatelli raises her right hand, her fingertips pinching a piece of silk with golden patterns. Yes, I discovered the handkerchief belonging to the royal steward, Lord Etienne. Pignatelli scans the hall. However, the place where the evidence was found was not Her Highness, the princess's bedchamber. The Empress Dowager leans forward slightly. What? Pignatelli points at Maru. It was right in that maid's room. What are you saying? That's impossible. Maru screams incoherently, her right hand clutching the fabric at her chest tightly, cold sweat seeping from her forehead. Stop wasting your breath making excuses, Maru. Medea slowly turns her head, a trace of mockery flashing in her pupils. Baroness Pignatelli would never act against your wishes. Medea's lips curl up slightly. A few days ago at dawn, sunlight pierced through the dense tree canopy, sprinkling onto the grass deep in the forest. Pignatelli stands under the shade of the trees. Are you serious, Your Highness? Medea, wearing a dark blue cloak, replies, of course. Medea extends her right hand, her fingertips stretching out in the light and shadow, the lace trim on her cuffs trembling slightly. Medea steps forward. I know about your father being unjustly executed. I will use the seal in my hand to clear his name. Her right hand hovers in midair, waiting for a response. Sachin. That was this lady's former surname. The former royal steward, Sachin, was executed on trumped-up charges, and he was precisely Pignatelli's father. The person who framed him was none other than the regent. This is also the reason why the regent could never win over this lady. Pignatelli stares at that hand. Pignatelli raises her hand, her fingertips touching Medea's palm. The two hands clasp together in the dim light of the forest. So you're saying this thing is not yours? Pignatelli holds up the blue silk handkerchief, unrolling it in her palm to reveal a bracelet wrapped with red flowers. Maru suddenly steps back, her right hand pressing hard against her chest. Why is that there? Pignatelli turns her head, looking directly at Maru's pale face. It seems you recognize this bracelet. Pignatelli turns to face the high seat. Your Highness, this bracelet indeed belongs to that maid. Several maids have witnessed her wearing it. The Empress Dowager sits upright in the center of the long chair. Continue, Pignatelli. Raising the evidence, Pignatelli says, considering it was found wrapped inside the handkerchief, it seems the Count gave this bracelet as a gift to the accused. Maru bursts into a scream. That's a lie. That bracelet was not given to me by the minister at all. Pignatelli presses step by step. Then who gave it to you? Don't lie and say you bought it yourself. Such a luxury item far exceeds a maid's salary. Maru freezes in place, her long, curly red hair soaked in cold sweat. It is an unbearable heavy pressure. I got it from someone else. Maru's mouth twitches, revealing a twisted, miserable, Smile. Someone else? Who are you referring to? Pignatelli suddenly leans in, the morning glory crest on this. Only high-ranking nobles are qualified to possess it. Pignatelli's voice is like a heavy hammer, her eyes dead set on the other. No, Maru lets out a faint whimper. Saemon's mother, the Duchess, is also here. Maru freezes in place. If it's discovered that I am Saemon's lover, she will absolutely not let me off. Pignatelli presses closer step by step, her right hand tightly gripping that silk handkerchief. Can't you just tell the truth? Maru suddenly steps back. That's because, it seems Medea's lips part slightly. There is someone else having an illicit affair with the minister. Am I right, Maru? Medea looks straight ahead, her tone as steady as ice. Maru suddenly gasps. Why? Why is she able to be so calm? Maru freezes in place, her lips trembling slightly. Could it be that from the very beginning, she saw through everything? Grandmother, Medea looks at the old woman on the high seat. It seems their feelings for each other are quite deep, pining for one another so bitterly behind their master's back. Medea slightly lowers her head. Please allow Maru to marry Count Etienne as his wife. Maru's knees smash heavily onto the ground, her hands desperately supporting herself on the cold floor. Maru leans over and kowtows. Your Highness, I was wrong. I will never dare do it again. Medea slightly lowers her head. Forgive me, I am merely fulfilling your love. Isn't Count Etienne the husband you have dreamed of? Maru lets out a short wail, her body stiffening from extreme despair. You want me to become Etienne's wife? Maru stands wearing a white wedding dress, her hands tightly gripping a white bouquet. Maru suddenly raises her head, not by Saemon's side, but spending a lifetime with that old toad? I'd rather die. Maru collapses onto the cold floor. This is all a lie. Maru crawls forward on her knees. It was the maid chief who ordered me to do it. She told me to hide the handkerchief in your room. Medea turns her head and looks down, letting the other beg at her feet. She said, you wanted to drive her away. Maru bursts into a scream. So she wanted to teach you a lesson. That is the truth. Please believe me. Maru raises her head, her body trembling violently from extreme terror. Maru sprawls on the ground and shrieks. I was blinded by her promise that she could get me registered as a noble. I was truly mad. Please forgive me. Kajene suddenly takes a step forward. Shut up. You're just talking nonsense because you're backed into a corner. That's not true. Your Highness the Empress Dowager, this girl, is framing me. Pignatelli shouts. Both of you have grown too bold. Pignatelli's tone reveals a bone-chilling coldness. To dare slander your own master, especially one who flows with Valdinus blood. The Empress Dowager's mouth twitches. What an embarrassing spectacle. The Empress Dowager issues her final verdict. Take these two insolent women away. Cut their Achilles tendons so they can never slander their masters again, and beat them until they are dead. Kajene has her arms held up by two guards, her body desperately twisting backwards. That's a lie. It was the princess who used my maid to frame me. Let me go. Catherine, save me. This is a frame-up. Kajene reaches out her right hand towards Catherine, her pupils revealing a final desire to survive. Catherine turns her head, letting the cries for help fade away at the end of the corridor. Piercing screams echo through the long corridor and reverberate in the spacious hall, then return to dead silence. The Empress Dowager sits in silence, her pupils gazing at the empty doorway. The Empress Dowager sits on the high seat, looking down at Medea. Do you think this proves your innocence? The Empress Dowager holds the feather fan in her right hand, pointing at the kneeling figure in the distance. Even without this incident, I have heard of your scandals. Even the servants scoff at you. Hand over the king's seal and stop playing these foolish tricks. The Empress Dowager bursts into a furious roar. I ordered you to bring it over immediately. Medea kneels on the cold floor tiles, her hands pressing hard on her knees. Mother, please calm down. Anger is harmful to the body. Catherine stands to the side, softly advising. She surely meant no harm. Catherine folds her hands over her chest. It's just because she is young and doesn't understand palace rules. The Empress Dowager suddenly waves her arm. Naive? That is utter nonsense. Even Verna, who is younger than her, is more mature than her. The Empress Dowager stares at Medea. How much longer must I endure this pitiful worm? Catherine stands beside the Empress Dowager. Princess, please ask for forgiveness. As long as you promise not to do it again, the Empress Dowager will forgive all this. Medea remains silent, her hands tightly, pressing her knees. The Empress Dowager suddenly stands up from the sofa. Do you plan to stay silent to the very end? You must be despising me, thinking I'm just an old woman confused confined in the deep palace. The Empress Dowager steps forward. Harboring such ambition, you will devour everyone around you, just like my son, who also wants to drive me away. Medea's shoulders suddenly tremble, her right fingers digging into her palm. Medea slowly raises her head. This seal was personally entrusted to me by His Majesty the King. In private, we are family, but before that, he is the sole king of Valdina. Medea's lips move slightly. How could I defy His Majesty's decree? The Empress Dowager freezes in place, her pupils dilating in shock. Please, as an elder of the royal family, understand my position. Medea leans forward, kneeling on the cold floor tiles, her hands folded, pressing against the cold stone slabs. Pignatelli stands to the side looking down, her hands folded in front of her white apron. She is right. The Empress Dowager slowly turns around, locking onto the kneeling figure. I indeed have no right to overturn His Majesty's orders, but as an elder, I cannot sit back and watch her insolence. The Empress Dowager stands with her back straight. Go to the chapel, kneel, pray, and repent. The Empress Dowager suddenly raises her voice until the goddess sends down a divine oracle of forgiveness. For you, the spire pierces the sky, the white stone walls gleaming coldly in the sunlight. The chapel bell rings dully. Medea kneels in the center of the stone-paved plaza, her eyes tightly closed, her hands clasped together against her chin, maintaining a posture of prayer under the scorching sun. It has been a day already. In the distance, nobles gather in twos and threes, discussing in low voices, their eyes occasionally sweeping towards the center of the plaza. The punishment given by the Empress Dowager this time. A noblewoman with long brown hair covers her mouth, her green pupils revealing unease. It is said she must kneel until the goddess sends down a divine oracle. A divine oracle? A strange man lets out a sneer, resting his right hand on his chin, his eyes full of mockery. Even a high priest rarely sees one in his lifetime. This clearly means she has no intention of forgiving her until the Empress Dowager's mood improves. Medea kneels alone in the empty plaza, her red skirt exceptionally glaring against the grayish-white stone tiles. The surrounding discussions surge like the tide, but she remains completely motionless, like a stone statue. A full moon hangs in the night sky, tree shadows swaying under the moonlight. The goddess statue stands in the center of the courtyard. Medea kneels at the foot of the stone statue, her hands clasped against her chin. Medea remains completely motionless, her breath turning into white mist. In the cold air, Nuriel stands in the dark shadows of the corridor, watching the center of the plaza. Two maids stand guard by her side, blocking the path to the courtyard. Nuriel pushes aside the maids blocking the way, her pupils locked onto that redback. Medea's slowly folded fingers have their knuckles turning white from the force. The moonlight suddenly intensifies, white flowers swaying in the light and shadow. Medea slightly raises her head, gazing into the void, waiting for that so-called miracle. The goddess statue stands under the moonlight, its stone robes drooping in the night. The full moon hangs behind the statue's head, white light enveloping the entire courtyard. Sunlight illuminates the Valdina Palace, the white domed buildings arranged in a picturesque disorder. The fountain in the center of the plaza continues to gush. Medea is still kneeling in front of the stone statue. Emil lets out a long sigh, taking off his glasses with his right hand and pinching the bridge of his sore nose, his pupils filled with weariness. It's been exactly 3 days. Emil puts his glasses back on, his left hand tightly holding a thick red book. His eyes watch Medea's figure through the window. She shrinks into a red dot in the center of the plaza. Emil stands at a high vantage point looking down, locking onto that completely motionless back, his right hand holding the window frame. Emil turns and leaves the window, his leather boots making a dull sound on the corridor tiles. I was wondering why you suddenly changed the meeting place. Cesare curls his fingers, lightly knocking on the heavy wooden doors. Cesare curls his fingers. But isn't your intention a bit too obvious? Cesare stands with his back to the doors, looking at the plaza outside the window, his arms folded across his chest. Emil, steps towards the depths of the corridor. It's just a coincidence. Cesari's pupils are filled with gloom. Absolutely impossible. The rumors about the princess have spread throughout the royal capital. She has been kneeling there for 3 whole days. You must be very worried, right? I said it was a coincidence, Cesare. Emile sits in the armchair, looking at the documents in his hand. Let's get down to business. The man turns the pages, his fingertips gliding over the dense text. I don't understand what a weapons guild like Paysad is looking for in Valdina, but within my authority, I can grant permission. Cesare lets out a light chuckle. Oh ho, you proposing such a condition must be because you want something. Cesari's fingertips rub the edge of the paper. What is it that you really want, Cesare? He stops his movements. Your Excellency the Chancellor. Emile sits motionless in the chair. Emile suddenly closes the book in his hands, the pages clashing with a dull thud. Emile lets out a long breath, his pupils sweeping over the dense clauses. With this money, the royal finances can be supported for a period of time. In exchange, I demanded a huge sum. Emile pushes up the glasses on his nose bridge, his fingertips, tightly pinching the edge of the check. Cesare walks towards the window, his black cape trailing behind him, his leather boots stepping across the floor tiles where light and shadow intertwine, his pupils gazing into the distance. To become the princess of Valdina, Medea kneels in the center of the plaza, her figure shrinking into a dot in the empty courtyard. Even a newborn foal has more strength than her. Medea bows her head low, her pupils staring at the cold ground, her body trembling slightly in the cold wind. What exactly is the reason? Cesare stands at a high vantage point looking down, his short black hair covering half of his mask. What does she want to get from her cold-hearted grandmother? In the past, the emperor grew increasingly wary of me, trying to tighten the noose around my neck. A middle-aged man opens his mouth wide and bursts into an angry roar, his forehead covered with twisted veins. Instead, I further enraged him. The middle-aged man sits in a high-backed armchair, his right hand suddenly pointing forward. Cesare stands below the steps, his short black hair covering his lowered face. A wound. The deeper the tear, the heavier the face becomes. Cesare raises his head. Short black hair scatters across his forehead, golden pupils flickering in the shadows. Cesare pushes open the window, locking onto the commotion below. A bloated nobleman is opening his mouth wide, shouting loudly. Cesare looks down from above. 3 servants surround the center of the plaza. Medea is still kneeling on the stone floor like a flower withering in the shadows. Cesare withdraws his gaze. A figure, right hand tightly pressing against the window frame. Hey, just for a moment. Count Etienne walks toward the corridor. Please stop. By the order of Her Majesty, the Empress Dowager, no one is allowed to approach. A female official blocks the man. Do you think I would interfere with her penitent prayers? It's me, Etienne. Count Etienne opens his wide mouth, the flab on his face jiggling violently. His right hand roughly points forward, the exquisite pendant on his chest, swaying in the sunlight. I just want to see Her Highness the Princess up close, just for a moment. Etienne steps forward and charges, pushing aside the female official blocking his way with his right hand. The female official loses her balance, falling backward. A black-haired man reaches out and catches the female official, his right hand steadily supporting her shoulder. The female official steadies herself. Chancellor, what a lack of manners. Etienne splits his lips in a grin, his flabby face piling up in the shadows. His eyes fixate on the figure ahead. I was once Her Highness the Princess's fiancé. Etienne strides towards the plaza, his leather boots stepping heavily on the stone floor. Medea kneels a few steps away, her body motionless in the cold wind. Etienne sticks out his tongue and licks his lips. His murky eyes lock onto the target. His right hand slowly reaches forward, 5 fingers spread open, grasping at the void. Your Highness the Princess, Etienne murmurs. Just as his fingertips are about to touch the silver-white hair, a stone cuts through the air, carrying a sharp whistling sound and accurately strikes the back of Etienne's hand. Etienne erupts in a miserable shriek. His right hand suddenly retracts to his chest, the back of his hand instantly red and swollen. His body staggers backward from the impact. What is this? Who did it? Etienne opens his mouth wide and roars, his eyes bloodshot with anger as he looks around the empty corridor. The stone bounces twice on the ground and finally rolls beside Medea's skirt. Etienne clutches his right hand, his body swaying violently on the spot, letting out a heavy, muffled groan. A Assassins. Someone is trying to assassinate me. Etienne collapses onto the stone floor, his hands tightly clutching the red and swollen wound, letting out a sharp wail. Master, an attendant, rushes forward. Assassination? What happened? The nobles in the corridor stop in their tracks, exchanging uneasy glances and low voices, their eyes locked onto the center of the chaos. Help! Protect me! Etienne struggles in the attendant's arms. Cesare stands by the windowsill. His right hand grabs a handful of black stones, his fingertips rubbing against the rough surface, making a faint friction sound. Then he tosses them into a flower pot. Emile suddenly jumps up from the sofa, his pupils contracting in shock, letting out a heavy gasp. What happened? Emile quickly walks to the window. Cesare strides towards the door, his leather boots making heavy thuds on the wooden floor. Cesare turns his face slightly. Nothing. Then he pushes the door open and leaves. Thunder roars. Dark clouds press over the distant ridges, and raindrops smash against the leaves, making dull impact sounds. The fleeting moment passes. The gray-white stone floor is soaked with water stains. The puddles reflect the gloomy sky, rippling with tiny circles. A torrential downpour falls. The rain curtain shrouds the entire magnificent palace, the spired buildings blurred in the mist. Rainwater splashes down the stone walls. Cesare stands deep in the corridor, his black cloak trailing on the wet ground, his right hand pressing the hilt of the sword at his waist. His golden pupils gaze at this rain curtain, half of his mask, gleaming coldly in the shadows. Guards run in the rain, their leather boots crushing the puddles and splashing a series of muddy water drops. Boss! Cesare slightly turns his face, locking onto the approaching figure. Wait here a moment. I'll go prepare the carriage. The attendant hands forward a long black umbrella. Take this. Cesare reaches out and pushes away the umbrella handle. It doesn't matter. We'll go together. What are you talking about? Your body is destined to ascend to the throne. The attendant suddenly grabs Cesari's arms. Do you think I would let a raindrop touch you? I'll be right back. The attendant turns and rushes into the rain curtain, his leather boots stepping on the puddles, making hurried sounds. Cesare stands alone at the edge of the corridor, his black cloak flapping fiercely in the wind. His right hand slowly rises, palm up, catching the icy raindrops. The throne? Cesare mutters to himself. The truth is, Cesare suddenly clenches his fist, his knuckles turning white from the force. I might not be able to possess it at all. Cesare steps into the rain, his leather boots stepping heavily into the puddles, splashing a circle of muddy ripples. The black figure disappears deep into the vast rain curtain. Cesare walks into the torrential rain, his short black hair soaked with water, his right hand tightly gripping the long black umbrella. His leather boots crush the puddles, making crisp sounds. Cesare stops his steps. Rainwater slides down his jawline. His eyes stare ahead. Medea kneels in the center of the rain curtain, her silver-white long hair clinging to her back, her red dress spreading in the puddle, her body trembling violently in the cold wind. Evil monster, Cesare, does my blood really flow in your veins? A man roars in the shadows. Your cruelty is endless, just like the one who devoured your mother. Medea slowly raises her head, her long hair covering half of her face, letting the torrential rain wash over her pale skin. Cesare stands in the rain, rainwater sliding down his pale cheeks. How ridiculous! That figure threatened by her own blood looks exactly the same. Cesare suddenly widens his eyes, his golden pupils contracting violently, reflecting in the rain curtain. The swaying red dress. Medea staggers in the wind and rain, her silver-white long hair dancing wildly in the air, her body tilting to one side. Cesare takes a step forward, his black cloak shaking violently in the rain, his right hand reaching towards the void. Three maids stand deep in the corridor holding black umbrellas, their white aprons particularly striking in the rain, their eyes watching Medea ahead, their bodies motionless in the shadows. Not yet. Medea grits her teeth. I must endure a little longer. Rainwater drips from the tip of her nose. Medea collapses at the foot of the statue, her golden long hair on the wet and cold stone floor, her body curled into a ball, letting the torrential rain wash over her back. The statue looks down at everything from above. Hold on a little longer. Medea kneels in the rain, her hands tightly gripping the ground, letting the torrential rain wash over her back. A black umbrella covers her head. Cesare stands behind her, his right hand steadily holding the umbrella handle, blocking the pouring rainwater. Medea turns around. Who is that? Cesare strides towards the distant palace gates, his leather boots stepping in the puddles, making dull sounds. Cesare stops his movements and slightly turns his head, his golden pupils locking onto Medea's figure. Rainwater slides down the edge of his mask. Medea bites her lower lip tightly, sweat mixing with raindrops flowing over her neck. Her pupils tremble constantly, her body stiff in the cold wind. What a wonderful play, Your Highness the Princess. Cesare raises his hand to press his mask, the corners of his mouth curling into a smirk. Boss. The attendant runs over holding an umbrella, his eyes fixed on Cesare, his leather boots hurriedly stepping through the puddles. Where did you leave the umbrella? The attendant stops beside Cesare, holding the black umbrella over his head. Why are you drenched like this? Shut up. It's been 5 days, and she is still holding on. It seems she completely disregards me. Medea kneels on the stone floor in the rain. Beside her lies a long black umbrella. The Empress Dowager stands by the window, looking down at the courtyard. She could have begged for mercy earlier. What on earth is she thinking? Your Highness, Pignatelli, speak softly. Pignatelli bows slightly. Forgive my presumption. May I share my thoughts? The Empress Dowager's hands hang naturally. Speak. I don't think. The princess is merely being stubborn. Pignatelli folds her hands over her abdomen. To defy you, she can only choose this method. After all, the maid chief has been slandering her. Perhaps the princess is just defending herself. The Empress Dowager stands with her back to her, her purple dress gleaming coldly in the moonlight. If a princess is pushed to this extent by a servant, isn't it laughable? Now, there's no one beside her. Without anyone supporting her, she can only fight alone. Pignatelli lowers her voice. Frankly speaking, I find a maid chief's behavior very strange. It seems there is another reason, making her go this far. The Empress Dowager raises her right hand, holding her chin in deep thought. Indeed, it is very suspicious. The maid chief was originally sent by the second prince. If she had a problem, she could have easily gone to the second prince. Why did she insist on coming? To me? What exactly is her purpose? The Empress Dowager turns her face slightly, her right hand pressing her chin in deep thought. Your Highness, I investigated the maid chief's background. Pignatelli presents a stack of papers, her hands steadily supporting the edges. The pages rustle in the light. The Empress Dowager takes the investigation report, her eyes sweeping over the dense text. Her fingertips press hard on the paper, her body freezing in the corridor. Pignatelli stands aside, her hands tightly clasped in front of her, watching the Empress Dowager's violently trembling fingers. The Empress Dowager suddenly crumples the paper, growling through gritted teeth. This lowly woman actually embezzled the princess's estate property to line her own pockets. Pignatelli bows slightly. Yes, Your Highness. She even used the princess's personal assets. The Empress Dowager lets out a cold laugh. So that's how it is. Medea must have discovered this, which is why she deliberately caused such a huge commotion. To dare use me to harm the princess. How dare she do such a thing? The Empress Dowager opens her mouth in anger, her hands tightly grasping the report, her nails almost sinking deep into the paper. Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager. Something terrible has happened. A maid suddenly pushes open the heavy wooden doors, her right hand tightly gripping the doorframe, rushing into the grand hall with a panicked expression. Her Highness the Princess has fainted. The Empress Dowager stands at the end of the corridor, the investigation report tightly clutched in her hand. Her pupils contract in shock. Medea lies on the stone floor, her hands weakly curled over her chest, her eyes tightly shut. How did it come to this? Her condition is even worse than I heard. The Empress Dowager stops beside Medea, leaning over to look at her pale face. Her hands tremble violently with anger as she suddenly turns her head, glaring at the attendants behind her. Did you all just stand by and watch, letting things escalate to this point? But, Your Majesty, you ordered not to give her a single drop of water. A maid stands in the rain with her head bowed. The Empress Dowager roars through gritted teeth. Do you have no flexibility at all? How can you be so foolish? The Empress Dowager kneels in the rain, her hands supporting Medea's back, roaring at the two dumbfounded maids. What are you doing? Do you plan to just leave the princess be? A cold hand quietly touches the Empress Dowager's wrist. The Empress Dowager suddenly looks down, gazing at the trembling hand. No, no. The Empress Dowager kneels before a coffin, her hands desperately grasping at the void, tears tears mixing with rainwater streaming down, letting out a sorrowful wail. "John, my son, quick, summon the royal physician." Immediately, the Empress Dowager holds Medea tightly in her arms, suddenly turning her head to issue the order. A maid turns and runs deep into the palace. "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and carry her inside." The Empress Dowager roars at the remaining servants. In the rain curtain stands a stone statue, its hollow eyes looking down at all beings. The Empress Dowager stands by the bed. Has the royal physician not arrived yet? It has been a long time. The maids of the princess's estate have already gone to urge him. He should arrive very soon. A maid stands aside with her head bowed, her hands tightly clasped in front of her. The Empress Dowager closes her eyes, her brows tightly furrowed. "Why is it so cold in this room?" A maid cries out in alarm. "I am sorry. I will go light the fire immediately." "Can you not even summon a maid properly?" The Empress Dowager opens her eyes. The maid explains in a low voice. The maid chief dismissed all the old servants, claiming they always cause trouble. The Empress Dowager turns around, gazing at Medea lying on the bed. That woman, truly causing chaos until her death. The Empress Dowager turns her face slightly, deep in thought. This is completely different from the rumors. The Empress Dowager looks around. The room's furnishings are sparse, without even a single decent decoration. Her gaze sweeps over the empty dressing table. Rumor had it that Medea, relying on the king's favor and the second prince's protection, lived extremely extravagantly. But there is absolutely no trace of squandering here. The Empress Dowager stares at the worn-out red round stool. Medea lies on the bed, a white wet towel on her forehead, her silver-white, long hair scattered messily on the pillow. Her eyes are tightly shut, her breathing weak and rapid. It looks like she has been neglected for a long time. The Empress Dowager stands with her back to the bed, her purple dress appearing heavy in the dimness. Her hands are tightly clenched, her fingertips turning white from the force. "Your Majesty, the maid sent to fetch the doctor has returned." An attendant pushes the door open and enters. The Empress Dowager suddenly turns around. The maid kneels on the ground. "Greetings to your Majesty, the Empress Dowager." The Empress Dowager quickly walks towards the maid. "Enough. Why are you the only one back?" The maid keeps her head down, staring at the ground. "The royal physician said he is very busy right now and cannot make house calls." The Empress Dowager stops in front of the maid. "Impossible. What could be more urgent than treating the princess?" The maid kneels on the ground. They said, Lady Claudio cut her finger while opening an invitation. The Empress Dowager suddenly widens her eyes. "What did you say?" He actually ignored a royal summons for such a minor injury. "No, things are not entirely like that." The maid's body sways violently, her voice echoing in the spacious room. "Ever since the late king passed away, I must have been drowning in sorrow for too long." The Empress Dowager clenches her fists, her knuckles turning white from the force, her nails digging deeply into her palms. The king's only sister is actually enduring such humiliation. The maid prostrates herself, begging, "I have committed a grave sin. Please forgive me." The Empress Dowager turns her head, her tone returning to its usual coldness. "Go summon the royal physician again. Do not reveal that she is here." Medea lies on the white bed sheets, a wet towel wrapped around her forehead, her silver-white, long hair messily scattered. Her eyes are tightly shut, her breathing weak. "Yes, your Majesty." The maid scrambles out of the room, the door gently closing behind her. The Empress Dowager gazes at Medea's pale face. "I must personally restore the discipline of the royal family." What on earth is all the noise about? The royal physician, carrying a leather medical bag, strides through the corridor, his leather shoes making heavy thuds on the floor. "All right, I'm here now, aren't I? Are you satisfied?" The royal physician suddenly pushes open the double doors and roars from the doorway. "Where's the princess?" The royal physician looks around the room, his tone full of impatience. "She always faints anyway. Why are you in such a hurry to call me over?" The maid stands by the bed with her head bowed. "She is lying right here. She looks perfectly fine. It's not like she's dying." The royal physician walks to the foot of the bed, one hand on his hip, loudly scolding the maid. "Do you know what the consequences will be if I offend the Claudio family? You refuse to come when summoned." The Empress Dowager stands with her back to the door, her black long hair pinned up, her lips tightly drawn. "And now you dare to speak disrespectfully to the royal family." The Empress Dowager slowly turns around, her tone icy. "Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager." The royal physician suddenly drops his medical bag. A mere royal physician dares to harbor such treasonous thoughts. The Empress Dowager steps forward. "You madman!" The Empress Dowager erupts in a furious roar. "I have committed a capital offense. Please punish me, your majesty." The royal physician kneels on the wooden floor, his hands desperately pressing against the ground, his body trembling violently. "Please kill me right now. Is that so?" The Empress Dowager stands in the shadows. "Since you are so eager to die, I will grant your wish. What are you doing? Hurry up and drag this man out." The Empress Dowager waves her right hand, her fingertips cutting through the air to deliver the final verdict. "I will severely punish such blasphemy against the royal family. Not only will his medical license be revoked, but his family will be permanently banished from the capital. I was wrong, your majesty. Please forgive me." Two guards hoist the royal physician by his armpits, forcibly lifting him off the ground. The royal physician kicks his legs wildly. "Anything but that. Please show mercy." The Empress Dowager raises her right hand, pressing her throbbing forehead, closing her eyes, and letting out a long sigh. The princess's authority has fallen this low. The Empress Dowager stands sideways by the bed, gazing at the unconscious Medea. Medea lies on the white pillow, a wet towel on her forehead, her eyes tightly shut, her breathing weak and rapid. "Has my personal doctor not arrived yet?" The Empress Dowager stands by the window, gazing at the pitch-black rain curtain. The maid stands by the door, bowing her head in response. "He has just arrived." The night shrouds the spired castle. Blue light flashes between the clouds, tree shadows sway in the fierce wind, and fallen leaves scatter and fly. The Empress Dowager walks down the stone steps, the maid closely following behind. The two walk through the dim courtyard. "I must handle this matter personally." The Empress Dowager stops her steps, turning her head to look at the distant bright lights. "Please relax. Sir Herodotus will take good care of the princess." The maid stands by the stone pillar, her hands folded in front of her, bowing her head and softly comforting her. The Empress Dowager's eyes are tightly shut, her breathing almost halting. How was the princess's condition? The Empress Dowager sits on a high-backed wooden chair, gazing at the figure on the bed, her purple dress spread on the floor. "Although I am reluctant to say it, the situation is very serious." Herodotus looks down at the medical chart, his eyes heavy behind his glasses. "I cannot imagine how she survived for 5 days." Herodotus grips his charcoal pencil tightly, letting out a sigh. "I will take every possible measure. Please go and rest first." Herodotus turns sideways and bows slightly to the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager remains silent, her pupils staring into the void, her right hand tightly clutching her pearl necklace. That place. The Empress Dowager stands on the castle terrace, gazing at the brightly lit villa in the distance. The evening breeze messes up her hair at the temples. That is the villa where the Duchess and Lady Claudio reside. The maid stands behind, following the Empress Dowager's gaze, her hands tightly clasped over her abdomen. The Empress Dowager withdraws her gaze, her brown pupils filled with coldness, the corners of her mouth drawn tightly into a straight line. Her pearl earrings sway in the night. The princess's residence is so desolate. The Empress Dowager stands under a street lamp, gazing at the distant spired buildings. A branch family's mansion is actually more luxurious than the royal palace. Her skirt sweeps across the stone pavement, making faint friction sounds. Her footsteps echo in the spacious courtyard. I have lived in seclusion for too long. Sunlight penetrates the tall lattice windows, spilling onto the red velvet curtains. Fine dust floats in the room. Medea lies on the pristine white bed sheets, her eyes tightly shut, her hands folded over her abdomen, her breathing steady and deep. Medea opens her eyes, her pupils reflecting the ceiling. She turns her head to look out the window. Sunlight penetrates the red curtains. How long has it been? Medea props herself up and sits on the edge of the bed, muttering to herself, Your Highness the Princess." Nuriel freezes in place, the tray in her hands shaking violently, the white porcelain teapot nearly falling. "Are you all right? You absolutely must not get out of bed right now." Nuriel quickly rushes to the bedside, sets down the tray, and reaches out to support Medea's shoulders. She must have been worried sick. Medea gazes at Nuriel. "Nuriel, tell me everything that happened while I was away." Medea straightens her back, her tone returning to calm. Nuriel bows her head in salute. "Yes, Your Highness. First of all, the head chef's wife committed suicide in prison." Nuriel stands at the foot of the bed, gazing at Medea's profile, revealing the cruel truth. After the Soul Island incident, an investigation against those who insulted the royal family has been initiated. Nuriel stands by the bed, head bowed. Medea leans against the headboard, expressionless. Her Majesty the Empress Dowager personally stepped forward to restore discipline. The Empress Dowager stands before the golden coat of arms, her right hand holding up a scale, her left hand pressing the hilt of a sword. Lord Emil is also assisting with all his might. The nobles who colluded with the head chef's wife have all been punished. Blood splatters on the black wooden table. Several severed hands are scattered among gold coins, their fingertips still maintaining a grasping posture. Rumors in high society say that Her Majesty the Empress Dowager's favor has shifted to you. Nuriel raises her head. The regent's power has finally been checked. Everyone is cheering for this. Nuriel gazes at Medea, her eyes filled with anticipation. Very good. Medea slightly turns her head, a faint smile appearing at the corners of her mouth. Has Madame Pignatelli taken over as the maid chief? Medea leans against the headboard, watching Nuriel's back. Nuriel bows her head in response. Yes, Your Highness. She is currently cleaning up the darkest corners of the castle. The head chef's wife has been dealt with. That was my uncle's right-hand man. Now it's time for his left arm, Count Etienne. But before that, coldness swirls in Medea's pupils. Nuriel, where is Maru? Now, sunlight penetrates the high windows, slanting onto the damp brick walls. Maru curls up in the corner of the cell, iron chains locking her ankles. Long time no see, Maru. Medea stands outside the iron bars, shadows covering her face. Who is it? Maru suddenly looks up. Medea stands outside the iron bars, her hands folded in front of her. Your Highness the Princess. Maru suddenly lunges at the iron bars, her hands tightly gripping the iron rods. You have finally come to save me. Maru kneels on the ground, her forehead pressed against the cold iron bars, tears welling up in her eyes, letting out a hoarse plea. Save Maru. I was truly wrong. I will never betray you again. Maru clasps her hands together, her fingertips turning white from the force, desperately kowtowing to Medea. The way you accused me in front of my grandmother is still fresh in my memory. Medea turns her head slightly, her voice echoing in the corridor. How can I believe these words? Once you are out of danger, you will completely forget your vows. No, I won't. I swear. Maru raises her tear-stained face. As long as you command it, I am willing to do anything. Maru slumps on the ground. Please do not abandon me. Medea stands quietly, letting Maru wail at her feet. Can you swear an oath to that? Medea looks down through the iron bars. Yes, of course I can. Maru kneels on the ground, her hands tightly gripping the iron rods. Drink it. Medea hands over a glass bottle. This is a poison that will paralyze your limbs. If the antidote is delayed, you will die of heart failure. Medea gazes at Maru's face. Your Highness. Maru freezes in place. You just said you were willing to do anything. Medea grips the iron bars with both hands, her purple pupils shining in the shadows. Was that vow a lie? No, I will drink it. I will drink it. Maru tremblingly takes the medicine bottle, her teeth biting her lower lip, tears streaming down her dirt-covered cheeks, letting out a heavy sob. Maru, you are Simon's lover, the young man from the Claudio Duke's family. In order to choke the Claudio family's neck, Medea gazes into the cell. You are still of use to me. Maru's fingertips pop open the bottle stopper, making a crisp sound. Maru tremblingly holds the medicine bottle, tilts her head back, and chugs the dark liquid. The liquid flows down the corners of her mouth. A spire stands under the white clouds, sunlight illuminating the white stone walls. The castle remains still amidst the tree shadows. Maru stands behind Medea, her fingertips running through her hair, dividing it into two strands. Your Highness, is this all right? Medea gazes into the mirror. The simpler, the better. Medea slightly turns her head. Have you taken the antidote? Maru's body freezes, fear showing in her pupils. Yes, Your Highness. You must not miss the time. Medea turns around. You must come regularly to get the medicine. Pignatelli pushes open the heavy wooden door, her hands folded in front of her apron. Your Highness, Her Majesty the Empress Dowager is waiting for you. It is time to go. Pignatelli steps aside to clear the path, watching Medea approach, her eyes strict yet calm. Medea stands up. All right, let's go. A strawberry tart is placed on the coffee table, the red berries stacked together. Steaming black tea is poured into the porcelain cup. The pastry stand is neatly arranged with biscuits. Medea picks up the teacup, closes her eyes, and takes a light sip. Her Majesty the Empress Dowager sits upright opposite her, her eyes strictly gazing forward, slowly raising the teacup in her hand. The porcelain cup clinks against the saucer, making a crisp sound. The black tea sways slightly in the cup, steam rising into the air. The Empress Dowager clears her throat twice, her right hand loosely clenched against her lower lip. Her gaze sweeps over the opposite seat. You have been ill for days, yet your demeanor is not messy at all. It seems you have fully recovered. Thank you for your concern, grandmother. Medea slightly bows her head, a smile in her pupils. When did your etiquette improve so much? Verna leans forward. Could it be that you were just putting on an act in front of the teacher Mother hired before? Medea turns her face, gazing at Verna. That was different from what I needed to learn, so it couldn't be helped. Verna slams the table and stands up, her blue pupils filled with anger. That's impossible. That teacher taught noble etiquette. This is absolutely impossible. I also studied under that teacher. Are you trying to say that I learned it wrong too? Verna grits her teeth, her hands tightly gripping her skirt, her body trembling with anger. More importantly, Medea, the Empress Dowager, sets down her teacup, her gaze sweeping over the other's plain clothing. As the Empire's only princess, you are dressed too plainly. The Empress Dowager waves her hand. An attendant brings over a heavy wooden box and places it on the marble table. Pick one. When the old Empress. A gift from your grandmother, Medea. She gazes at the wooden box. Verna covers her mouth, full of surprise at the interior of the wooden box. Lined with red velvet, a gold pocket watch, an emerald-encrusted necklace, and a silver hairpin, flickering alternately under the light. Thank you, grandmother. Medea bows slightly, her right hand resting on her chest, her purple pupils calm as water. Verna suddenly stands up. What? No. Grandmother, why? If this goes on, all the good things will be taken by Medea. Verna stares fixedly at the wooden box, gripping her skirt tightly with both hands. Medea rests her chin on one hand, her fingertips against her jaw. Lost in thought, Verna leans close to the wooden box. Sister, if there's nothing you fancy, I'll pick first. These are all so beautiful. Which one should I choose? How about the sapphire? The Empress Dowager's eyes suddenly widen, her blue pupils shrinking to pinpricks, staring fixedly at Verna's extended right hand. How dare you? The Empress Dowager slams the table and stands up, her body trembling violently with anger. Her voice explodes in the room. How dare you be so insolent? Verna freezes in place, hugging the wooden box tightly with both hands. Gee, grandmother, what did I ever say I was giving them to you? The Empress Dowager looks down at her. How dare you so casually touch the princesses? That body. Verna lowers her head. That's because sister wasn't choosing. Medea sits quietly, her expression calm as water. The Empress Dowager glares at Verna. Address her properly. Not sister. It is your highness. Just because you live in this palace, do you think yourself equal to Valdina? The Empress Dowager suddenly slams the table. You must observe the etiquette between sovereign and subject, Verna, Rob, and Claudio. The Empress Dowager's voice is icy, her black veil swaying with her bodies. Not trembling. Verna freezes in place, her pupils full of shock, her lips quivering slightly. I just did what I've always been doing. Why are you suddenly only targeting me? Verna suddenly stands up, her hands tightly, not gripping her skirt. Verna turns and rushes toward the door. Grandmother, this is really too much. The Empress Dowager sits back down, gazing at the empty doorway, her blue pupils full of disappointment. Truly, utterly childish. To think I never noticed how immature she is. The Empress Dowager picks up her teacup, her fingertips applying slight pressure. It seems I have been too indulgent with her. The porcelain cup lands gently on the saucer, emitting a crisp sound. The surface of the black tea. That ripples. Grandmother, please be understanding of Verna. Medea tilts her head slightly. Verna and I grew up together in the Imperial Palace and shared everything. Whatever I had, Verna would surely have too. Your reprimand must have certainly confused her. The Empress Dowager suddenly stiffens, staring fixedly at Medea. Everything Medea has, Verna also has. Verna is merely a collateral noble, whereas Medea is the direct princess. How could this be? The Empress Dowager furrows her brows, her eyes revealing disbelief. Grandmother, may I choose this? Medea breaks the silence, reaching out to point at the wooden box. Her purple pupils calm, as usual. The Empress Dowager snaps back to reality and looks at the object in Medea's hand. Isn't that too plain? I like this one. Medea takes a short dagger from the box, her fingertips tracing the hilt. Her silvery white, long hair reflects the metallic luster. A blade forged from Damascus steel. It's a fine weapon. Medea unfurls her folding fan. The fan ribs fan out like sharp blades. Her purple pupils reflect an icy gleam. The Empress Dowager falls silent, gazing at her granddaughter before her. This attire is so simple it borders on shabby. Where on earth did the rumors of the princess's extravagant wastefulness come from? Since you like it, then so be it. The Empress Dowager turns her head, avoiding that calm. That gaze. Medea bows slightly. Thank you, grandmother. I will visit you again next time. The door makes a soft click, and the room returns to silence. Sunlight streams through the tall windows, casting shadows on the marble floor. Is Verna truly the only one who cannot distinguish between superior and inferior? The Empress Dowager furrows her brows. This cognitive bias is by no means accidental. If Joachim harbors dangerous thoughts, the Empress Dowager suddenly widens her eyes, her pupils shrinking in shock, staring fixedly at a point in the void. Pignatelli, we need to send a letter. The Empress Dowager sits in the armchair. Pignatelli bows slightly. Yes, Your Highness. We need to summon the royal relatives. The Empress Dowager stands up, her profile stern in the shadows. We must recall the Margrave of Monte. The Margrave of Monte. Duke Claudio suddenly swings his fist, slamming it heavily onto the desk. How could Mother do this to me? Duke Claudio clenches his jaw, his facial muscles twitching violently. His purple pupils are not bloodshot. To recall that brat who always clung to my brother. Duke Claudio paces around the room, then suddenly turns to look out the window. Anyone can see that this is to keep me in check. Verna also went to see Mother and has been crying ever since she returned. Catherine turns her face. It seems she was reprimanded for addressing Medea improperly. I don't understand why Mother is suddenly acting like this. Duke Claudio slumps into his chair, his right hand pressing hard against his forehead. His slender purple pupils are filled with anxiety. Once Mother intervenes, the losses become immeasurable. The merchant guild that embezzled royal funds has been dismantled. She even cleared out the annex, trying to drive us out of the imperial palace. Damn it, the public has already started sympathizing with that princess. Duke Claudio suddenly slams the desk and stands up. Catherine stands aside, softly persuading him, "Darling, calm down." Duke Claudio stares fixedly at the secret letter on the desk. How can I calm down? The revolution plan is about to completely collapse. If they find out Medea is not the real culprit, Duke Claudio is swallowed by the purple shadows. That then my justification for inheriting the throne will be completely ruined. Darling, don't worry. Your power remains secure. Catherine reaches out and rests her hand on Duke Claudio's shoulder. Although we lost the maid chief, the minister of the inner court still stands on our side. We can manipulate the inner court as we please. Catherine leans in close to Duke Claudio's ear, her pupils that reveal a cold, calculating gleam. As for the Margrave of Monte, there's no need to worry. We just need to act first. Catherine straightens up, gazing at the dim scenery outside the window. Do you have a specific plan? Duke Claudio turns his head. How about hosting a grand banquet to celebrate Medea's recovery? Catherine gently strokes her chin, the corners of her mouth curling into a smile. That poor child has suffered quite a lot recently. We must let everyone see Medea smiling amidst resplendent luxury. Catherine slightly narrows her eyes, her pupils in the shadows, not appearing exceptionally sharp. What a brilliant idea. As expected of you. Duke Claudio's mouth curves upward, revealing a cruel smile. Catherine walks toward the wall, stopping in front of a giant coat of arms shield. We only don't need to do what we've always done. Just like always. Catherine reaches out to stroke the cross on the shield, her fingertips trailing along the cold metal edge. Catherine murmurs softly, Medea will become our shield. Light streams through the tall, arched windows, spilling onto the red bench. Medea sits with her back to the window. Medea snaps shut the folding fan in her hand. The fan ribs strike her palm, making a crisp sound. Her purple pupils gaze into the void, her fingers directly massaging the embroidery on the fan. That face. Your Highness. A cloaked figure steps into the room. Leather boots step on the marble floor, producing steady footsteps. Nuriel pulls back her winter hood. I have delivered the message as instructed. Not to Emil. Medea turns her head. The guards must have been very strict. It seems your little friend is more capable than I thought. Nuriel bows her head to report. Tom begs to be summoned again next time. But Your Highness. Nuriel hesitates to speak. Nuriel asks in a low voice, how do you plan to use him? Medea turns her face. The corners of her mouth curl into a smile. Before the hunt begins, one must first lay the traps. Medea stand by the table, her right hand pressing on the fan handle. Tell Tom to keep a close eye on that man. Nuriel bows her head to receive the order. Yes, Your Highness. Then, the hunting ground is ready. Medea turns around. Now, let's go meet that hunter. Medea walks toward the tall windows. Outside stands a pristine white-spired castle. Clouds drift slowly in the blue. Sky. The white spires pierce the heavens. Sunlight sweeps across the castle's stone walls, casting massive shadows. The wooden door emits a muffled sound, slowly pushing open inward. Light traces an arc on the floor. Greetings to Your Highness the Princess. Emil steps into the room, his right hand resting on his chest as he bows. Long time no see, Emil. Medea sits on the red bench. I heard you had something to discuss with me. Emil sits on the opposite bench, his hands resting on his knees. His gaze sweeps over the pastries on the table. Recently, that seems a bit too quiet. Emil lowers his head slightly. What exactly are you planning, Your Highness the Princess? Your Highness, why are you suddenly acting like this? Emil sits on the bench, his hands pressing on his knees. His gaze sweeps over the tea and pastries on the table. Just now, Claudio's faction finally collapsed. I cannot miss this moment. Emil says if you're considering using your seal to act against Claudio, please think twice. You may not realize it, Your Highness, but that man is a threat to Valdina. I beg you to reconsider. Medea picks up her teacup. Yes, I came today exactly for. Medea is suddenly startled. This smell, Medea asks. The aroma of the tea is very strange. Did you brew it yourself? Emil answers, yes, my maid brewed this tea herself. But if you don't like it, I will brew another cup. Medea smiles and says, I will drink it. The tea must be wonderful for you. Medea asks, would you like to try it? Emil answers, Your Highness, why are you suddenly acting like this? Medea turns her. Head, you sincerely offered tea brewed by your own hands. I am very touched. Since it is tea brewed by your own hands, it would be a pity to enjoy it alone. The maid lowers her head and steps back. Please forgive me, Your Highness, a person of my status. But how could I dare? Medea stands up. Do not make me repeat myself a second time. Your Highness, please tell me, why are you doing this? Emil stares at Medea. Medea walks away from the bench. Her skirt sweeps across the carpet. Medea raises the teacup. Drink it. The maid suddenly looks up, her cheeks trembling, her pupils shrinking in fear. Both hands tightly grip the lapels at her. Chest. Your Highness the Princess. Emil suddenly stands up. Medea. Closes in step by step. Why? Do you not dare to drink it? Is it because this cup contains a poison that drives people mad? Emil freezes in place. His gaze darts between Medea and the maid, a layer of cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Your master drank the poison without knowing, yet is still protecting you. I have committed a capital offense. The maid. Falls to her knees, her pupils brimming with tears. I was just afraid of dying. The maid. Props herself on the floor with both hands, her body trembling violently. I was wrong, Your Highness. I am willing to accept any punishment. Emil watches this scene, his pupils revealing complex emotions. Just please don't make me drink that poison. The maid lies prostrate on the ground, gasping, her voice hoarse from fear. Medea. Stands quietly, her face devoid of any expression. Emil suddenly stands up. What is going on? Poison? The maid slumps onto the floor. I was threatened by Duke Claudio. Drinking this tea, over time, will drive a person mad. He ordered me to make sure you kept drinking it. Medea. Turns sideways. In my past life, I thought it was strange. A brilliant and talented man suddenly withdrawing from the world. Medea gazes into the void, a departing figure appearing in her mind. That was a dead and swallowed by madness. Ultimately unable to overcome the insanity, he committed suicide. A withered hand swipes at the emptiness, dark red traces seeping between the fingers. That is the concealed truth. Medea withdraws her gaze, her pupils returning to their cold sharpness. Her right hand gently shakes a golden hand. Bell. Her punishment is left to you. Medea looks at the attendant beside her. The bell's ring echoes in the dead silent room. Take this child away first. Medea issues the command. Two guards step forward, grabbing Kajene's shoulders and forcibly dragging her out of the room. Please spare me, Your Highness. The maid reaches out toward the door, with her hand. Emil, save me. The heavy wooden door slowly closes, cutting off the cries from the corridor. The room returns to dead silence. Only Emil remains, standing in the play of light and shadow. How did you know that the tea was poisoned? Emil turns his face. His pupils reveal scrutiny and doubt. Medea sits on the bench. I have smelled this. That scent before. Consider my good luck. Those arduous expeditions have finally paid off. Medea lowers her eyelids. If I hadn't memorized that scent back then, there's no way I would recognize it now. Illusion grass, a poisonous plant that can drive a person mad just by its scent. Medea sits on the bench. You had better take antidotes regularly. Emil calls out softly, Your Highness. You have always protected the Claudio family. Why the sudden change of mind? After brushing past death, my eyes have finally opened. Medea turns her face. Medea turns her head, her tone as cold as a blade. Emil, I know what my uncle is after. Medea crosses her hands. I think you're equally aware. I came here today to declare my intentions. Medea turns her head. For the sake of my brother, Peros, I will protect Valdina. To that end, I will eliminate my uncle's right hand, Count Etienne. I want to help you regain control of the inner palace. Emil remains silent. The Count is no simple opponent. Emil's mouth curls up slightly, his pupils revealing a hint of amusement. I will be glad to serve. Emil sits on the bench, his hands crossed over his knees. Please tell me, your plan. Emil leans his body forward slightly. Boss, are you really not going? There's even an invitation specifically addressed to you. Cesare stands with his back to the door, his pupils gazing at the manor outside the window. Cesare replies in a low voice, Forget it. The attendant tears open the envelope. If you stay in Valdina, sooner or later you will have to face Duke Claudio. This is a banquet celebrating the princess's recovery. Why not go and see the spectacle? This is an invitation for the mercenary, Arcares. The attendant points at the name on the letter paper. They have heard of your reputation. Cesare lowers his head in silence, his short hair covering his profile. I'll go. The attendant freezes in place, his pupils widening in surprise. Boss, Cesare orders in a low voice, Go fetch Terence. Go immediately. The attacks are becoming more and more frequent. Terence stands in front of the bookshelf, his pupils showing concern. Terence pushes up his glasses, his fingertips gently touching the leather bag strap. He lets out a heavy sigh. I'm losing my ability to suppress it. Are you listening? Terence turns around and gazes at the back figure by the window. I am listening. Cesare stands with his back to the light, reaching out to put on a white shirt. Cesare buttons it up. The curse has been present for 3 years. Terence. Dot takes a step forward. Your body has reached its limit. Come with me to the magic tower. My master might be able to delay it. Cesare turns around. So, that you wanted to sit and wait for death? Cesare crosses his arms, leaning back against the huge floor-to-ceiling windows, the corners of his mouth curling into a smile. You know, but that's not my style. Cesare turns his head. You always use those eyes to clear away everything. Terence stands in front of the bookshelf, gazing at the man opposite him. The first prince of Kajene, the youngest commander-in-chief, the Duke of Romania. These are all things you seized with your own hands. Terence opens his palm, and a purple mask lies quietly in his hand. That is the identity of the head of the Passad mercenaries, and also a sharp blade hidden in the dark. Terence furrows his brows. What, are you really sure that priest can lift the curse? If he fails, what do you plan to do? Cesare leans against the window, his short black hair reflecting the setting sun. Terence, as long as there is a sliver of a chance, I will never let go. I have made it to today entirely by grasping onto that insignificant hope. Cesare stands before the window, his short black hair reflecting the glaring sunlight. His golden pupils gaze at the mask on the table. Disguising yourself as an arms dealer, making profitless trades with a former classmate. Cesare stands with his back to the shadows, his pupils locked onto the distance outside the window. Cesare turns his face slightly. Every step is a massive gamble. I don't need a peaceful death. In the ruins of the slums, a man carrying water walks past a dilapidated wooden door. An old woman sits on a straw mat, gazing at the fabric in her hands, her head bowed as she mends worn-out clothes. Hey, that man squats in the corner, forcefully hammering hard, or a woman walks away with a bucket. Nuriel is disappearing behind the ruined walls. This smell. Tom raises his hand to cover his mouth and nose. Your Highness, there is still time for us to go back. Medea tightens her black cloak. It's fine. You said the person you're looking for is a retired soldier? Tom steps over the cracked earth. Medea stops walking. Yes, more accurately, his family. To think they didn't go to the veterans' village you ordered to be built. Tom rests his chin in his hand. Do they resent a royal family? Medea slightly turned her face. Who knows? I once ordered the construction of the Casey Relief Center. Half of the retired soldiers moved there, but many still remain outside. Among them is the rebel adjutant who captured me in my past life. Medea gazes at a back figure in the crowd, locking onto the outline of that man. Medea lowers her hood. I must confirm with my own eyes to decide whether to let him live or kill him before everything is too late. Bastard. Hand over the bread. A loud crash of a collapsing wooden frame comes from afar. Dust billows in the narrow alley. Tom grips the hilt of his sword. Your Highness, that I'll go handle it. Medea softly instructs, don't hurt them. A hoarse voice comes from the shadows. That silver-haired young lady over there. A man draped in a tattered cloak steps out. His footsteps drag across the gravelly ground. Care for a fortune-telling? The man extends a withered hand. Medea stops walking and turns her face, gazing at the uninvited. Guest, don't judge me by my looks. I am one of the oldest oracles in this country. The man pulls back his hood, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. His cloudy eyes lock onto the figure ahead. Let me foresee the future for you. He extends his withered palm, his fingertips, grasping at the air. Medea turns sideways. No need. Thank you. I already know. It is exactly because of that you must listen. The man withdraws his hand. Shouldn't this life be different from the previous one? The voice echoes in the narrow alley. Medea suddenly stops in her tracks, her pupils contracting sharply. She abruptly turns around, gazing at the hunched figure. A wise choice. Young lady. The man lets out a low chuckle from his robe. He takes out 2 transparent spheres. His fingertips roll them, and the spheres emit crisp clicking sounds. Inside the spheres, a dim blue light glows. My, this life won't be easy either. The man gazes at the murky sky. His fingertips roll the 2 crack-covered spheres. Chaos blocks your path. The spheres hover in midair, emitting a dim white light that shrouds the path of the stars, attempting to steal your light. But do not fear. The man lowers his hood, revealing the lower half of his wrinkle-covered face, gazing at the silent figure before him. Medea, that stand beneath the starlight. That star will cleave through the chaos before you. Medea slightly raises her chin. Whatever that is, I don't need it. I could do it myself. TSK, that won't be easy. The man puts away the spheres, receding back into his loose black cloak. Something viscous is tightly entangling you, young lady. The man murmurs softly. His withered fingers suddenly shoot out, tightly gripping Medea's wrist. Have you heard of the Tears of Dawn? Medea slightly turns her face. Tears of Dawn. It is a vial containing a blue liquid, radiating the faint light of the goddess's power. It can erase all diseases, memories, and even fate. Those tears, that will save a falling giant star. Heaven deeply loves you. The man tightens his grip, his fingertips digging deeply into Medea's sleeve, enough to let the starlight fill the sky, to make the 12 constellations reverse time. Remember, the blood of the continents wise flows within you. The man lifts a corner of his cloak, his green pupils trembling violently in the shadows. You are the one who conveys the goddess's will. You are the only hope beneath this sky. Medea holds her breath, her pupils reflecting the other's crazed eyes. Only you can find those tears. The man suddenly coughs violently. Black blood spews from the corners of his mouth, staining his tattered lapels red. You should see a doctor. Medea steps forward and supports the man's shoulders. The man pushes her hand away. No, this is heaven's warning to me. Black blood drips down his chin, staining his cracked fingers red. Your heart is still as kind as ever. The man raises his head, his cloudy eyes locking onto Medea's face. He lets out a hoarse sigh. Go quickly. My life has not yet reached its end. The man turns around, his heavy footsteps heading deep into the ruins, leaving behind a hunched back. Medea stands in place, her straight hair fluttering slightly in the breeze. Her pupils reflect the direction he disappeared. Her fingertips still retain the sensation of his touch. Do not forget the old man's words. The voice echoes in the empty alleyway, carrying a certain ominous premonition. Medea pulls her black cloak tight, covering those eyes that bare. Golden patterns. She steps forward, her black boots treading on the rough ground. The golden patterns on her skirt flash by in the shadows, walking toward an unknown fate. What on earth is this? Medea lowers her head in thought. Tears of Dawn and a falling giant star. Cesare strides forward, his short black hair slightly ruffling in the wind, followed by 2 attendants, also draped in heavy black cloaks. The group silently passes through the narrow alley. The sound of their leather boots hitting the ground is uniform. And heavy. Cesare stops walking, gazing at the figure disappearing into the shadows in the distance. Two children huddle in the shadows of the ruins, clutching each other's clothes. Are you sure this is the place? Cesare rests his hand on the long sword at his waist, gazing at the broken walls of the slums. Yes, I'm very sure. The informant said they saw an old man here. He could speak the ancient language of the continent, and his belongings bore the crest of the Sadia tribe. Terrence pulls down his hood and pushes up the glasses on his nose. Don't get your hopes up, Cesare. That tribe went extinct long ago. It's hard to guarantee the accuracy of the information. Cesare steps into the crisscrossing alleys, looking around at the dense buildings. There are more alleys here than I imagined. Is it this way or that way? An attendant steps in front of Cesare and pushes open a heavy wooden door. You're late. The cloaked old man stands in the shadows, gazing at the visitors before him. I thought this old bag of bones would go to the afterlife first. Cesare stops in his tracks, staring at the withered face before him. Who are you? Sama of the Sadia tribe? The old man twitches the corners of his mouth, squeezing out a murky laugh from his throat. The Black Star. The old man slightly turns his head, his cloudy eyes glinting beneath his hood. An evil entity entwines your fate. That is primordial darkness. It will not rest until the host draws their last breath. It will never let go easily. Cesare kneels on one knee, looking up at that wrinkle-covered face. Do you know the way to lift the curse? Cesare gazes at the old man's figure. I have been searching for you, the former leader of the Sadia tribe. If you are willing to assist me, I promise to help your tribe revive. The old man slowly shakes his head. The fate of my tribe is not something you can control. However, I do indeed know the way to lift the curse. Cesari's golden pupils suddenly contract. You need the tears of dawn to purify the primordial evil. Cesare takes a step forward. Or the tears of dawn, elder. The old man looks. Up. They're the sorrow left by the goddess on this land. When the goddess first descended upon this world, this land was filled with chaos and darkness. Out of pity for the suffering living beings, the goddess shed tears, washing away all the gloom in the world. Cesare stares at the old man's eyes. Where can they be found? The old man extends his withered fingers, lightly touching Cesari's shoulder armor. Black Star. Unfortunately, they are not in your orbit. Terrence takes a step forward. Elder, what does that mean? The old man starts coughing violently, his body trembling in his loose robes. You will ultimately never be able to find the tears. Fate has never allowed it. The old man suddenly covers his mouth. Black liquid seeps through his fingers, staining his cracked lips red. The old man staggers, falling backward. The palm covering his mouth and nose oozes black blood. There is no more time. Cesare reaches out and supports his shoulders. Stop talking. Save your strength. We need to treat you first. The man suddenly grabs Cesari's collar, his eyes widening. Never forget Valdina's morning star. It will guide you. That is the only. The old man's throat emits a broken, gasping sound. His body goes completely limp in Cesari's arms. Hey, wake up. The old man, with a trail of blood at the corner of his mouth, looks into the void one last time. The stars have finally converged again. This time, I beg you. The old man's hand slips from Cesari's arm. It falls to the cold ground. Terrence quickly steps forward and bends down to check the old man's pulse. He's dead. Gallo stares at the corpse on the ground. To pass away so suddenly. We went through so much trouble to find him. Terrence stands up and looks at the empty ruins. I thought we were finally going to uncover the mystery, but he only left. Up behind these vague words. Valdina's morning star can save you. Cesare stands in silence, gazing at a spot in the void. Cesare releases the old man's body, stands up, and looks at his attendant, Gallo. Contact home. I need to stay in Valdina for a while longer. Gallo bows his head to receive the order. Yes, sir. Cesare puts on his mask, concealing his sharp golden eyes. Valdina's, that morning star. Medea stands with her back to the camera, her silvery white long hair cascading over a magnificent red robe. She stands before a sacred statue, letting the light swallow her silhouette. Nuriel bows his head in apology. I'm very sorry, Your Highness. I should have stayed by your side at all times. Medea walks in the shadows of the street. It's fine. Do not let it bother you. More importantly, is it around here? Nuriel looks around at the buildings. Yes, according to the notes the master gave me. A loud shout comes from afar. Where did you hide that bastard Theo? Hand him over right now. Nuriel stops in his tracks and abruptly turns his head to look at the source of the voice. Medea gazes forward in silence. A loud crash of splintering wood comes from inside the house, accompanied by a woman's scream. A burly man steps over the shattered doorframe, looking down at the red-haired woman who has fallen, to the ground. The red-haired woman shrinks into the corner of the wall. How many times do I have to say it? I don't know. He ran away a long time ago. The burly man steps forward. Do you think I'd believe such nonsense? If you dare to keep your mouth shut, I'll sell you off first. The burly man reaches out his thick hand and suddenly grabs the woman's shoulder. Come with me. Medea turns her face slightly and softly calls out, Nuriel. Nuriel bows his head to receive the order. Yes, your highness. Nuriel instantly disappears from his spot, his cloak drawing an arc in the wind. His long sword is drawn, the tip pointing directly at the burly man's throat. The burly man freezes in place, his pupils suddenly contracting. The burly man raises his hands, a broken scream squeezing out of his throat. Where did you come from? The burly man shrinks back, his shoe soles scraping against the ground with a piercing sound. Damn it! The burly man abruptly turns around and dashes toward the open door, disappearing at the boundary of light and shadow. Just you wait. I will be back. Medea stands at the doorway, her black cloak covering her silvery white long hair, watching everything inside the house. The red-haired woman kneels on the ground, looking up at Medea. Thank you for saving me. Medea looks down at the kneeling woman in silence. Medea walks into the house and stops in front of the red-haired woman. Is your brother's name Theo? The red-haired woman nods repeatedly. Yes, that's right. He's my twin brother. Medea stares at her. Twins. Medea runs amidst the firelight. The roars of pursuing soldiers echo behind her. Over there, the princess has escaped. Theo holds a torch high, pointing into the depths of the darkness. Catch the princess. Medea gazes at the red-haired woman. She looks very much like that person, the Theo she met in her previous life. Medea looks around the shabby house. Do you live here alone? Are there no other family members? The red-haired woman lowers her head and softly replies, yes. My brother left home 3 years ago. He occasionally sends back news, but he can't. Come back right now. Medea lowers her eyes. 3 years ago, Theo must have already joined the rebel army by then. The red-haired woman crawls forward on her knees, reaching out to grasp Medea's black cloak. Excuse me, are you the princess from the royal palace? I heard that person call you that just now. Nuriel stands at the doorway, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, watching the street warily. The red-haired woman raises her face, her hands tightly clutching the hem of her clothes. Please, take me with you. If I stay here, I will definitely be sold. Medea turns her back to her. I can provide you with a way to survive, but you don't need to follow me. I am Sori, that do not keep useless people by my side. The red-haired woman suddenly leans forward, pressing her hands hard against the floor. It might be hard for you to trust someone as lowly as me, but I've done all kinds of work. I can do anything. The red-haired woman straightens up, pressing her right hand firmly against her chest. Even those secret tasks that are inconvenient for you to entrust to others, I can accomplish them for you. Medea lowers her eyelids. You might regret choosing me as your master. The red-haired woman looks up, her eyes locked onto Medea's face. It doesn't matter. This is my choice. Medea stands in the center of the room where light and shadow intertwine, silent for a moment. Then come with me. Medea lifts her cloak and extends her right hand toward the red-haired woman. Her silvery white, long hair spreads out in the halo of light. The red-haired woman stares at that hand, slowly raising her arms, her fingertips trembling, as they extend forward. The red-haired woman grasps Medea's palm, her knuckles turning white from the force. Yes, your highness. A strange man. Grips a black whip. His knuckles exert force, tightening the grip. The leather whip rubs against his palm, making a dull sound. The carriage is parked in a clearing in the woods. Medea, wearing a cloak, stands beside the carriage with Nuriel following closely behind. The shadows of the trees obscure the view from behind. Nuriel watches the movement ahead. Dry leaves crunch underfoot. Nuriel abruptly turns his head, looking in the direction the sound came from. Who's there? The burly man steps out from the shadows of the trees, followed by several thugs wielding knives. Where are you rushing off to? The encirclement. Spreads out around the carriage. The burly man grins, baring his teeth. We still have an unsettled score. Nuriel blocks the carriage door, his right hand resting on the hilt at his waist. This is a human trafficking organization. The burly man tightens his grip on a thick rope, the fibers rubbing against his fingertips. That young lady will fetch a good price. If you don't want to get hurt, then hand over all your valuables. Medea sits behind the carriage window, her profile reflected on the glass. Her eyes calmly gaze outside. Medea softly calls out Nuriel. Nuriel bows his head in response. Yes, your highness. A cloth bag is thrown onto the muddy ground, kicking up dust. The heavy thud echoes through the woods. The burly man picks up a gold coin. With a flick of his fingers, he tosses it into the air. The metal spins under the setting sun. Is this money enough? Medea stands on the carriage step, her black cloak fluttering in the wind. I want to buy this child. The burly man closes his fingers, catching the falling gold coin. It seems we've met a big customer today, but the money you gave is only enough. Not to buy that scrawny little girl. The burly man opens his palm, pointing in Medea's direction. If we capture and sell you, we can make at least 0.5 times the price. Nuriel steps in front of Medea, holding his short sword in a reverse grip, the hilt pressed against his palm. The thugs close in from all sides, their shadows looming over the clearing. Medea turns her head to look at the carriage window. Shea, wait in the carriage for a while. Nuriel, handle them. Nuriel draws his sword, the blade slicing through the air. Yes, your highness. A thug holds a heavy sword horizontally, blocking the center of the forest path. Trying to play the hero all by yourself? I'll make you beg for mercy on your knees. Nuriel stands firm, his cloak billowing in the wind. The thugs flank him from both sides. Blades of grass are crushed beneath their soles. Nuriel lowers his brow, his pupils locking onto the enemies ahead. Murderous intent solidifies in his eyes. Nuriel swings his sword in a horizontal slash, cutting through the air and shattering the incoming blade. With a backhand thrust, he pierces through a thug's shoulder. The thug clutches his severed arm and falls to the ground, screaming in agony. My arm is cut off. The burly man takes a step back, cold sweat dripping down his beard. The guard is too strong. This is pure madness. The burly man points at the carriage. Grab that woman. The thugs bypass Nuriel and charge. Towards Medea. Medea stands her ground, her fingertips brushing the edge of her cloak. Her eyes show no emotion, as if she is looking at a group of dead objects. In the long years of my past life, I painfully learned all of this. Medea sits on a high-backed chair, her hands folded on her lap. The surroundings are filled with noisy whispers. The knights saw me as a burden, rather than the Duchess. Jason sits at the end of the long table, resting his forehead on one hand. He lets the knights on both sides argue, remaining silent throughout. He just stood by and watched. He did nothing at all. Medea looks down at her hands, her knuckles turning white from the force. I realized that I must protect this body myself. A thug suddenly lunges forward, his chest colliding with a cold blade of wind. A broken groan squeezes out of his throat. Blood splatters onto the muddy ground. Medea grips a purple short sword tightly, the blade plunging into the enemy's chest. She lets go, allowing the corpse to fall backward. Medea stands amidst the sunset glow, her right hand hanging by her side. Her fingertips retain the warmth of the blood. Nuriel stops his sword-swinging motion and turns to look at the figure beside the carriage, murmuring softly, Your Highness. Nuriel widens his eyes, staring at Medea's back. The hand holding his sword trembles slightly. This is a decisiveness he has never seen before. The burly man swings his arm, hurling a heavy iron sword. Insolent brat. Taste this. The long sword flips through the air, the tip pointing straight at Medea. Nuriel shouts hoarsely from a distance, Your Highness, dodge quickly. Medea stands in front of the carriage, holding a folding fan horizontally in her right hand, the edge of the fan resting against her jaw. Her purple pupils lock onto the incoming blade. Two stones pierce through the air and strike the side of the iron sword. Sparks fly in midair, forcefully altering the sword's trajectory. The iron sword grazes past Medea's shoulder and heavily nails itself into the wooden boards of the carriage. Medea maintains her stance, tightly gripping her purple folding fan, her gaze cast toward the direction from which the stones flew. Nuriel rushes toward the carriage, calling out anxiously, Your Highness. Nuriel sheathes his sword and bows his head in apology. I'm sorry, I should have acted faster. Medea stands by the carriage wheel, her gaze sweeping over the broken swords on the ground. It's fine, Nuriel. She turns her face slightly, her peripheral vision locking onto the trembling, burly man in the back. Should I kill them all? Medea lowers her eyelids, looking at her fingertips. Is it necessary to dirty our hands? Time is tight. Dispose of them properly. Nuriel presses his hand against his chest and bows to accept the order. Yes. Nuriel drags his long sword, the tip scraping across the ground, leaving a dark red trail of blood and making. Not a harsh scraping sound. The burly man sits on the ground, his hands propping him up from behind, his body trembling incessantly. Wait, please, spare us this once. Deep in the woods, startled birds take flight. A scream pierces through the foliage. And echoes under the setting sun. The grass rustles with that crisp sound. A scout crouches behind the bushes, parting the leaves to spy on the slaughter in the distance, sweat seeping from his forehead. The sun sinks below the horizon, and the woods return to a dead silence, leaving only the sound of the wind blowing through the treetops. The scout hides behind the bushes, watching the departing carriage, and lets out a gasp of awe. What a ruthless character. The scout, turns to look at Cesare. That woman just now. That was the princess of Aldina, right? Cesare stands under the shadows of the trees, tossing a stone in his right hand. What kind of princess fights like that? Did you see her accurately strike the vital points just now? Cesare remains silent, his fingers rubbing the edge of the stone. He then tosses it into the air, producing a crisp, clinking sound. Medea stands beside the carriage, her right hand slowly folding her fan, as if the slaughter just now. That never happened. Cesare stands on high ground, his pupils locked onto the departing carriage. That morning star of Aldina. Is she really human? The carriage bumps along the wasteland, its wheels crushing gravel as it gradually disappears at the end of the light and shadow. Nuriel stands by the window. The child we brought back that day is adapting very well. Nuriel turns around to look at Medea beside him. The maids all like her very much. She is hardworking and smart. Medea closes the book in her hands. That's wonderful. Medea hands over the thick book and asks Nuriel beside her, "Have you found the old woman I mentioned before?" Nuriel lowers his head, avoiding Medea's gaze. "I am very sorry. We haven't even found a trace of her." Medea lowers her eyelids, gazing into the void. "Is that so? I wanted to see her again, even if just once." The old woman, wrapped in a dark cloak, smiles in the white light of her memory. "Remember this. Within your body, my lady, that flows a bloodline. It belongs to the wisest person on the continent, the one who conveys the goddess's will." Medea suddenly opens her eyes. What exactly did those words mean? Wait, if it refers to the wisest person, then? Medea holds her breath, her pupils suddenly contracting. Medea presses her fingertips against the book cover, exerting force, and abruptly stands up. She heads toward the door. Nuriel follows closely, looking alarmed, and calls out loudly, "Your Highness." Medea lifts her skirt and walks briskly, her silvery white, long hair swaying behind her. She passes through the dim corridor and steps onto the stone spiral staircase, her footsteps echoing between the empty walls. The wisest person, the sage, and the country protected by the sage. Medea stops in front of the massive door. The sage's stone of Valdina. If this stone protects this land, it is because its master is the ancestor of Aldina. Medea pushes open the heavy wooden doors. The hinges emit a deep grating sound. A beam of blue light pierces through the darkness, shining straight down from the dome. Medea steps into the hall, gazing at the levitating crystal in the center of the altar. The blue light swallows the surrounding shadows and illuminates. At her face, Medea walks toward the center of the light, her footsteps echoing in the empty sanctuary. Her figure gradually merges into the intense light, as if becoming one with that ancient power. Medea cups the blue crystal in her hands, watching the flowing light inside. "Please tell me if you have something you want to convey to me." Her fingertips touch the surface of the crystal, making a crisp, clinking sound. The interior of the blue crystal suddenly cracks open. A bolt of white lightning pierces through its core, and cracks spread rapidly like a spider web. Medea holds her breath, her green pupils trembling in the intense light as she stares at the phantom image emerging from deep within the crystal. Could this be? Medea holds the crystal with both hands, the light illuminating her face. She softly murmurs that name. Tears of Dawn, Valdina District 1. Sunlight blankets the red brick roofs. A canal runs through the neat streets, and a bell tower stands at the edge of the square. An attendant walks towards Kajene, Bowing slightly, Your Highness, did you like the performance just now? Catherine clasps her hands together. Because it's your favorite opera, we specially changed the actors and the orchestra. Are you satisfied? Medea turns her face slightly. So that's how it is. No wonder the aria just now sounded a bit more strained than usual. Catherine holds onto Medea's arm and smiles. Catherine raises her hand to cover her lips, letting out a light chuckle. I'm very sorry, Your Highness. I should have realized earlier that this didn't meet your standards. It was my oversight. Please do not be angry. Verna covers her face with her hand, closes her eyes, and lets out a soft sigh. Catherine reaches forward and tightly grasps both of Medea's hands. But Your Highness, you will definitely love tonight's banquet. Medea stands in place, letting her hands be held. Banquet? Catherine looks directly into Medea's eyes, the corners of her mouth turning up. It is to celebrate Your Highness's recovery. Catherine holds Medea's hands. The Claudio family has prepared a gathering. Medea looks down at the clasped hands. Inside the fitting room, a white long dress is displayed. Jewelry is arranged on black velvet trays. Pearl necklaces and rings emit a faint glow. Catherine turns sideways and makes a gesture of invitation. Your Highness, please come this way. Verna follows behind the two, letting out a gasp of amazement. Catherine walks beside Medea, looking at the fitting mirror ahead. You've been exhausting your mind over various trivial matters lately. Catherine stops and turns to look at Medea's profile. Isn't that so? Maru stands in the distance behind the crack of the door. And flashes by. Catherine spreads her hands, presenting the magnificent dresses behind her. We have prepared these for Your Highness. An attendant holding a tray places a pair of red high heels in front of the mirror. The jewelry and dresses sparkle under the lights. Verna widens her eyes, staring at the room full of expensive accessories. My goodness, these all look priceless. Medea sits in the center of the long bench. I truly didn't expect you to put so much thought into this for me, Aunt. Catherine bows slightly, folding her hands in front of her. There is absolutely no need to be polite, Your Highness, to earn your approval. It is my greatest joy. Verna leans toward Medea. What is wrong with her? I clearly gave her treatment beyond the standard, yet her reaction is so cold. She is truly unpleasant. Medea turns her face slightly, gazing at Verna. Catherine folds her hands over her chest. Lastly, I have a special dress. I hope you can wear it to tonight's banquet. Your Highness, I shall take my leave now. Verna, wait for Her Highness to change her clothes and be sure to escort her out. Do you understand? Verna sits on the blue long bench, staring down at the floor. Yes. Two maids walk toward Medea. Your Highness, please allow us to help you change. Medea turns her back to them. There's no need. Medea simply looks forward. Maru, you will attend to me. Maru stands behind Medea. Yes, Your Highness. Medea walks deep into the dressing room, with Maru following closely behind. The heavy door closes behind the two. Verna sits alone on the blue long bench, staring at the empty room. She can't even dismiss a maid who betrayed her. Does she really think she deserves these expensive clothes? Verna raises her right hand, pressing her fingernails against her lips, biting hard. That face simply that doesn't suit such luxurious attire. The golden skirt drags across the floor, making a soft, rustling sound. Medea steps out from behind the folding screen, her entire body bathed in light and shadow. Verna abruptly looks up, her blue pupils contracting in shock, letting out a short, sharp gasp. Oh! Medea, dressed in a white long gown, steps forward. A maid covers her lips with her hands, gasping in admiration. My goodness, you are so beautiful. It's as if the stars have descended upon you. Medea turns her head, looking at herself in the mirror with cold eyes. The maid stares at that face. This is impossible. How can someone be as beautiful? That as a fairy? Verna suddenly stands up, her hands tightly gripping her skirt. This shouldn't happen. This absolutely shouldn't happen. A maid walks up behind Verna and softly reminds her, Miss, you should go prepare as well. Catherine actually wanted me to wear that dress and enter the hall with Medea. Verna looks down at the gift box. Inside lies a maid's dress with a blue bow. If I dress like this and stand next to her, I will only become a background piece to highlight her. This dress, Medea, wearing a golden long gown, steps into the hall with Verna closely behind. Inside the hall, that sparse applause breaks out. The guests gather together, whispering to each other. A man waves a folding fan, covering his mouth and nose. Why is that woman's attire so tacky? She looks just like a maid. Verna lowers her head, clenching her teeth, her nails digging deeply into her palms. In the end, I'll only be reduced to a foil for Medea, that lowly half-blood. Verna suddenly looks up, her hands gripping her skirt tightly, crumpling it into a ball of wrinkles. Where exactly am I inferior to her? Verna steps forward, her high heels clicking loudly on the stone floor. Medea turns sideways and looks at Verna, who is standing blankly in place. What do you think of this dress, Verna? Medea lifts the wide skirt with both hands. The white fabric is adorned with gold embroidery. She slowly turns her body in front of the mirror. Do you think this outfit is appropriate? Verna freezes in place, her hands tightly clutching the edge of her skirt, her knuckles turning white from the force. Yes, sister. Verna's mouth twists upward, her facial muscles twitching unnaturally. It is truly very beautiful. The banquet hall is brightly lit. Guests stand in small groups on the intricately patterned floor tiles, conversing in low voices. Look here, the champagne is glowing. The wine glasses are stacked into a tower. The liquid sways inside the glasses. It is indeed spectacular. A noble woman flutters a red, folding fan, covering half her face. I heard this banquet was personally requested by Her Highness. That is far too extravagant. Does she not know what is happening outside? The country is at war. The streets are filled with starving commoners. A hand raises a wine glass, the liquid refracting halos under the light. Count Montegar stands on the balcony, looking down at the noisy crowd. Yet she is here, enjoying such luxury. Duke Claudio swirls the wine in his glass. Medea is still young, after all. If she wants to become mature, but she still has a long way to go. As long as she holds the king's seal in her hands, she has nothing to fear. Duke Claudio lowers his eyelids, the ripples of the wine reflecting in his pupils. That woman is truly hard to deal with. It's difficult to please her. Count Montegar swirls the liquid in his glass, gazing, at the center of the hall. However, as long as we host a banquet of this scale, she will stay quiet for quite a while. Count Montegar turns his head. Is that so? I see. Duke Claudio takes a sip of his wine, the corners of his mouth curving up slightly. This is enough. As long as Medea appears wearing that dress, the stage I've set up, that will be completely finished. An attendant stands in front of the grand doors, unrolling the parchment in his hand, and loudly announces, Her Royal Highness, Princess Medea Cassid Valdina, has arrived, accompanied by Verna. Robin Claudio. A white skirt drags across the carpet. Gold thread embroidery sparkles under the light. High heels click crisply, on the floor. The hall instantly falls dead silent. The guests stop their conversations one after another. A man blocks the wine glass in his hand. The wealthy woman next to him abruptly snaps her folding fan shut, her eyes wide as she stares ahead. A commotion erupts in the crowd. How could this be? Why is she dressed like that? Duke Claudio frowns deeply, staring toward the grand doors. Catherine covers her lips in horror. This is impossible. Why is she appearing here like that? The grand doors are thrown completely open in the bright light. Verna stands dressed in a white gown. Medea stands beside Verna, wearing a black long dress, her head lowered to avoid the crowd's gaze. The figures of the two form a sharp contrast in the light and shadow. Verna, wearing a white long dress, lightly brushes the lace edge with her hands, a smile curving her lips. Why is she wearing that dress? A gasp erupts from the crowd. Medea stands at the bottom of the steps, her silvery white, long hair draped over the black fabric. Her purple pupils stare coldly ahead, her hands folded over her folding fan. The banquet hall is brightly lit. The guests, gathered in small groups, whisper about the entering figures. The sound of the commotion spreads through the air. Verna, in her white gown, stands in the brightest spot of the light, her hands folded over her abdomen. Everyone is looking at me, every single one of them. Verna slightly tilts her head up. I really am more suited for this royal palace than that duke's. That mansion. Verna stands at the edge of the shadows, the corners of her mouth curving up as she watches the glowing figure from behind. Verna turns her face slightly, the light outlining a cold silhouette. I outshine Medea. Medea wears a black long dress. Count Montegar turns around, watching the approaching figure. He calls out Princess Medea's name in a deep voice. Count Montegar places a hand on his chest and bows forward in greeting. I, Montegar, have returned from the border to pay my respects to your highness the princess. Verna stops in her tracks, her blue pupils slightly contracting. Who are you? Medea steps out from behind Verna. Her black skirt traces an arc on the ground. She lifts the edges of her skirt with both hands and curtsies to Count Montegar. Long time no see, Lord Count. Thank you for coming from so far away. Count Montegar freezes in place, staring at the curtsying woman in front of him. Please forgive my lack of manners. It has been so long that I actually failed to recognize you. Count Montegar straightens up, his gaze wavering between the two women. But Count Montegar lowers his brows, staring at the scene before him. This is completely different from what the Duke told me. Catherine quickly rushes forward, her shoe soles tapping urgently against the floor, calling out Verna's name. Why are you wearing this? This is Her Highness the Princess's dress. Verna remains silent, lowering her head to avoid her gaze. Count Montegar. Dot approaches holding his wine glass, his gaze sweeping over the two. I was wondering who was standing beside Her Highness. So it is the young lady of the Claudio family. Catherine abruptly turns her head, her face instantly turning pale. Count Montegar. Catherine quickly puts on a smiling face, folding her hands over her chest. They are cousins, so they look very much alike, don't they? Catherine nudges Verna, gesturing for her to step forward and bow. Verna, quickly greet your great-uncle. Good, Count Montegar sneered, interrupting her. Whether she looks like her is another matter. I, for one, can clearly see this young lady's ambition to become Her Highness. Catherine stomped her feet in anxiety. Verna, your great-uncle misunderstood. What on earth are you doing? Medea turned sideways and softly stopped her. Don't blame Verna, Aunt. Don't be too harsh on her. Medea raised her right hand to her chest. Verna wanted this dress very much, so I gave it to her. Verna suddenly looked up, her blue pupils shrinking violently. What? The scene cuts back deep into memory. Medea stood in front of the fitting mirror, turning her head to ask Verna behind her, Verna, do you want to wear this one? Verna froze in place, her teeth biting her lower lip tightly. Impossible. She did it on purpose. She definitely did it on purpose. Medea turned around to the guests. The Duke's estate always sends me expensive gifts. Shouldn't I return the favor for once? A burst of whispers erupted around them. The guests whispered to each other, their eyes darting back and forth between the two. Medea lowered her eyes slightly, her fingertips gently stroking the edge of her folding fan. The chandelier swayed under the dome, and the whispers of the guests merged into a torrent. So, Miss Verna coveted Her Highness's dress, truly lacking in self-awareness. Verna gripped her white skirt tightly, her pink hair falling as she trembled. Catherine stiffened her back. We are currently in a time of war. His Majesty is still fighting on the battlefield. The people are enduring hunger. As a princess, how can I indulge in luxury alone? But your Highness is His Majesty's only blood relative. No matter what you wear, who would dare say a word? A noblewoman unfolded her folding fan, covering her face, revealing only a pair of brown eyes. Indeed, who would demand Her Highness to prove her identity? Medea raised her head. I am the only princess of Valdina. No matter what I wear, my essence will not change. Why worry about such things? The woman bowed slightly forward. Truly a wise statement. Who would dare question your Highness's decision? You don't need to burden yourself for a gorgeous dress. Verna stood under the lights, her hands gripping the white skirt tightly, her knuckles turning white from the force. Her teeth bit her lower lip tightly, and a faint broken sound came from her throat. A silver spoon tapped against a glass, the crisp sound piercing through the hall. The commotion instantly subsided. A middle-aged man raised his wine glass, standing in the center of the banquet hall, and loudly called for everyone's attention. Everyone, please look here. Tonight's banquet is to celebrate the return of Her Highness the Princess. Her Highness has been handling state affairs in place of His Majesty, who is on an expedition, even at the expense of her own health. The Empress Dowager held a wine glass, standing in the crowd, watching the speaker with stern eyes. The middle-aged man continued to wave his arm. Although this cannot compare to Her Highness's dedication, everyone must understand that this banquet is to pray for Her Highness's well-being. The guests lowered their heads and bowed one after another, shadows enveloping their faces. Count Montegar sighed. Good heavens. He actually praised Her Highness. more than his majesty. Duke Claudio raised his wine glass. The very existence of Her Highness the Princess is itself the glory of Valdina. Duke Claudio raised his wine glass to his chest, gesturing in Medea's direction. Cheers to Her Highness Princess Medea. Countless wine glasses crossed in the air, the clinking sound echoing in the banquet hall. Medea's figure was reflected in the wine. Medea slightly raised her head, coldly scrutinizing the fanaticism before her, staring at those eyes. How could she not have recognized these eyes just now? Medea stared at the wolf-like eyes ahead. They devoured my brother, tore me apart, and took away the throne of Valdina. But this time, I will absolutely not sit and wait for death. Medea stepped forward, her black skirt sweeping an arc across the floor. The Claudio family has taken such good care of me. It truly delights my heart. Medea stopped in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling window, her back to the noisy crowd. How could I not understand my great-uncle's unspoken words? Medea turned her head, her fingertips stroking the edge of the folding fan, her gaze cast toward the night sky outside the window. Tonight is the eve of Saint Esther. The eternal star of victory is about to appear. A heavy bell chime suddenly erupted, echoing above the entire palace. The guests stopped their movements one after another. That's the sound of the great bell. A commotion broke out in the crowd. Everyone was looking up at the high place. The bell chimes trembled endlessly in the night. It's time. The guests raised their heads one after another, and whispers spread throughout the banquet hall. Medea slightly lowered her head. This banquet is to pray for victory on the battlefield, and also for His Majesty on the distant plains. Medea walked to the window, her black dress shimmering faintly in the moonlight. Her right hand gripped a short sword. She stared at the deep night sky outside the window to seek the saint's blessing. Count Montegar suddenly turned around, pointing to the sky outside the window. Look over there. A streak of white light pierced through the night, trailing a long tail, soaring high into the sky. The light burst between the clouds, turning into countless falling meteors that trembled violently in the night sky. That is the spear of Saint Esther. A meteor shower covered the entire sky, points of light erupting continuously in the darkness. Roars rose and fell in the clouds. A miracle has descended upon the royal capital of Valdina. It's the spear of Saint Esther. The saint has descended upon Valdina. This must be a revelation of His Majesty's impending triumphant return. The guests cheered under the light. Duke Claudio stood in front of the window. This is impossible. Saint Esther. Medea turned her head, her pupils reflecting the Duke's stiff face. You must be very panicked. This is completely out of your plan. Medea withdrew her gaze and stared at the falling meteors outside the window. In my past life, this banquet was a nightmare for me. Back then, I was completely played by my great-uncle in the palm of his hand. Only my brother saw through my great-uncle's true colors. He once tried to stop me. Peleus stared ahead, his long golden hair falling over the edge of his armor, his right hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Medea, don't get too close to our great-uncle. Medea stood on the balcony, watching the meteors falling across the sky. I am sorry, Peleus. Medea held onto the stone railing. I cannot bring down our great-uncle right now, nor can I avenge my brother who was torn apart by demons. The guests surged toward the edge of the balcony, raising their hands high to the sky. The star of victory shines upon Valdina. This is an omen of a triumphant return. Several soldiers stood in the courtyard, pushing heavy iron cannons. The muzzles aimed at the night sky. Fire burst in the barrels, and the roar pierced the trajectories of the meteors. Medea closed her eyes, her hands tightly clasped in front of her chest. In this life, I will absolutely not repeat the same mistakes. A full moon hung in the center of the night sky, stars covering the deep blue curtain. Please, you must be safe. Military tents were scattered across the plains. A bonfire burned in the center of the camp, wood crackling in the flames. Heavy footsteps approached from afar, iron armor clanking with the movement. Peleus sat with his back to the bonfire, his head lowered, staring at the ground. D'Angelo walked up to Peleus, his metal greaves bumping against the wooden stool. He pulled out the stool and plopped down, his hands folded and resting on the hilt of his sword. Your Majesty, what is your Majesty thinking about so intently? Peleus looked down at his palm. The metal gauntlet held a round pendant, revealing Medea's portrait. I've been thinking about my sister all night. Peleus closed the pendant, the sound of metal colliding spreading through the silent camp. This is a particularly nostalgic night.